Greetings, everyone. Just that, because that seems to be a little bit in the way. There we go. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Fearless Floyd Show. As always, I am your host, Fearless Floyd, and today is Tuesday, May 29th, 2024. And tonight we have the greatest show on earth. And I am bringing you, um, hmm, I don't even know how to describe either one of these people. They're both heroes in my eyes who have sacrificed everything for the betterment of us people, United States of America, inhabitants that love this country. And it's a sad state of affairs where we're at and where we're going. Um, John Thaler, I'm going to do a introduction. Christine's already in the waiting room. John's already contacted me in the back channel, so he's ready to jump on anytime. I told him to take a minute because I'm going to do an introduction for both of them and mainly about the topic that both of us are going to discuss. I want to let you guys know that this video, it's going to be shown live here right now on YouTube. And then after that, it's off YouTube because we're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about election fraud. We're going to talk about the weaponization of the Department of Justice and District Attorney's Office, Attorney General's Office, and the corruption and the fraud, the bribery, the graft, what that looks like. We're going to cover it all. We're going to talk about it all. We're not going to keep anything back because this video is going off YouTube. It'll be on my other social media platforms, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Facebook, Telegram, etc., etc. This is a very important video in my eyes because these two people who've, for most people who've never done a RICO investigation and don't understand what it entails to do a RICO investigation, oh my God, it is tedious, time consuming, uh, very repetitive, a ton of reading, researching, gathering materials, multiple requests. It's a lot of work, a lot of work. And I know Christine's doing hers by herself. So I understand what that entails because I did mine by myself. John, he's a licensed bar attorney. Of course, he has a staff that assists him with that, but I guarantee you for the most part, it was him putting his nose to the grindstone, especially once he found out that his family was in jeopardy due to his investigation and his, of course, livelihood as an attorney, doing his own investigations for other clients. Bear with me. I have had a horrible 2 weeks. I'm still recovering from being rear-ended, still in pain. I don't like taking pain medication or anything like that. So to get through this video, I had to take some pain medication. So my voice is a little bit slower, as you can tell, and I don't quite have all that energy that I usually have. So bear with me. I look like I'm in slow motion. I know. I feel like I'm in slow motion. So let me dive into this because I want to give you guys the introduction of who we are, what we are, and what we're going to talk about. Right. Oh, that's not the I might get it right here in a second. Oh, that's all right. So we'll do ladies first. How's that? We'll do it the Southern gentlemanly way. All right, I got share sound over here. Of course, I went to ballotpedia.org just to find something on Christine because there's not much information out there in the sphere that is available. Christine Scott, no party affiliation, ran for election to the U.S. House to represent Florida's 23rd Congressional District. She lost in the general election on November 8th, 2022. Scott completed Ballotpedia's Candidate Connection Survey in 2021. Click here to read the survey's answers. Biography. Christine Scott was born in Glendale, California. She attended the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and the University of Oregon for undergraduate study. Scott's professional experience includes being self-employed. Elections. Florida's 23rd Congressional District election from 2022. Says she's a small business owner. And this is the general election from 2022. And as you see, no party affiliation, no backing, no political action committees. Christine Scott garnered 3,000 votes, 3,079. A substantial loss to the Republican and Democrat, which were basically almost tied, statistical tie. And this is the Democratic primary, of course, which she didn't run. Here's the Republican primary, again, for what she didn't run. And these are the withdrawn or disqualified candidates, both Republicans. And then the 2020. This is the general election, disqualified or withdrawn. And here's the Republican primary. Withdrawn or disqualified candidates, Christine Scott, and apparently she ran under the Republican Party. I guess she got disenchanted by 2022 and decided to run as an independent. For those of you who'd like to follow Christine, she is available at Rumble. This is her channel, Christine Q. Scott. Please go follow her. She doesn't have very many videos. Most of these you can find mirrored on my channel. Hey, my brother, I'm doing a live with Christine Scott and John Thaler. I'll call you back when I'm done. All right, brother. Be a couple hours. Bye. Okay. All right. Let's dive into John Harris Thaler, author of Report to the Governor. This is his website, reporttothegovernor.com. And, you know, I always say I'm shadow banned and definitely being monitored by one of the alphabet agencies, if not multiple. And I have sent Mr. Thaler and Jacqueline Berger many emails, many phone calls and voicemails, and they just never received them for some reason. And boom, I reached out to him this time and he got right back to me. Strange. Anyway, uh, I'll let him tell the story, but just to give you a little synopsis here about the author, on September 19th, 2020, McKinley Harris Thaler, nearly 3 years old at the time, was abducted. The abduction was intended to extort his dad into terminating a multi-state investigation concerning money laundering and public corruption. To date, neither McKinley's dad nor dad's family members have seen McKinley or received any communication from him. And this is a picture of the two together. 4 years of investigation, 475 plus pages of narrative, 5,000 evidentiary documents. And I understand what it means to go through this. You've got to read all this stuff. That's why I said you just read, and continue to read. So, what is a report to the governor about? On September 19th, 2020, McKinley Harris Thaler, nearly 3 years old, was abducted. The abduction was intended to extort his dad for terminating a multi-state investigation concerning money laundering and public corruption. To date, neither McKinley's dad nor dad's family members have seen McKinley or received any communication from him. Dad does not know where his son is. The state of Arizona, its most populous county, Maricopa, and the cities of Mesa and Gilbert, which lie within, are cesspools of corruption. Fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, crystal methamphetamine flow freely through an open border. And with it comes the cash. Billions of dollars flow into hundreds of cash houses while the drugs are held in stash houses. The result is a plethora of racketeering enterprises: money laundering, tax evasion, insurance fraud, payroll theft, election fraud, and bankruptcy fraud, among many, many, many others. Bribes paid to public officials, both elected and appointed, provide the cartels with safe haven. In February 2019, attorney John Harris Thaler and his team were retained to investigate. Thaler had a star witness, Brittany Ray Chavez, his wife of 3 years. At the time of their marriage in 2016, Thaler had no idea that his wife and her mother, Donna Ray Chavez, were participants in the largest money laundering scheme in U.S. history. Even though you've never heard about this, have you? On mainstream media. Wonder why. Thaler had no idea that Brittany had known him since 2011 and had been paid to create an extortion scheme against him to disrupt an earlier investigation into organized crime. He did not know that their chance meeting in October of 2014 was anything but an accident. He did not know that the marriage was a sham. Thaler's accidental discovery of certain falsified recorded trust deeds in early 2018 would change everything. By late 2019, Brittany was a cooperating witness who requested federal witness protection. Before protection could be arranged, Brittany succumbed to family pressures and threats of violence aimed at her, at Thaler, and at their 2-year-old son, McKinley. On September 19th, 2020, McKinley was abducted in an ill-fated attempt to force Thaler into rescuing his son. Report to the Governor is an inside story of Thaler's 3-year investigation. It includes the findings and evidence provided to Governor Doug Ducey of Arizona at the time in May of 2022 and to attorneys general in 5 additional states. It explains who hijacked Arizona's elections and how. It chronicles the illegal swatting efforts spearheaded by corrupt police officers and judges on the take to discredit Thaler and to prevent this story from being told. and I am not suicidal. And I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. All right. So there you go. There's your little synopsis. This is some of the information that's provided in the book. And of course, you see he compares signatures so you can see that some are forged, some actually belong to his wife, Brittany Ray. A lot of them are illegible. Let me get that out. And this is not just in Arizona, this extends across the country. All right. So here's the book. It is available in softcover, hardback, and I believe Kindle. Here you go. There's the Kindle version for $13, $12.99. Here is the, I believe it's the hardcover. Yep, for $39.95, and the softcover for $26.95. All available at reporttothegovernor.com. And no, I'm not making any money on this. So this is all to support John and his efforts because believe me, I know what it costs to be the boss. So I know what John's gone through. Now, I went through all these reviews prior to initiating the video. All of them are 5-star reviews. There's this one troll who didn't even really leave a review. I'll show it to you. I have no idea where these 2 stars are at. I looked for them, couldn't find them. Definitely, they did not write a review, so I don't know what this is about. So aside from these 2 trolls, it's a 5-star book. So that's a misnomer right there because of these trolls. And again, you're going to have trolls with everything. Doesn't matter. If you're telling the truth, you're going to have trolls. Just part of the baggage. So this was reviewed February 11th, 2024 by Zaggy. 5-star. The truth hurts! Exclamation point. Amazing work by Mr. Thaler at great personal price and risk. He projects what is right and what is wrong with our country. An outstanding example of how a complex system of corruption can be explained through the use of documents that were created by the very people who abuse the system and the trust of our country. Not only that, the trust of our government. You're going to see this, and all right, just read that one. This is from Patrick Mancini, 5 stars, a brilliant investigative tale from October 31st, 2023. So this is right after the release. Some writers talk a good game, but present few facts and little evidence. That's definitely not Report to the Governor. Thaler presents a history of racketeering and corruption with a plethora of facts and evidence so overwhelming that it leaves the reader's head spinning. The book, set in 4 distinct sections, describes both the macro disaster and the micro disaster concerning Thaler's personal experiences investigating the racketeering that led to the abduction of his son, McKinley. Written more like a mystery novel than textbook, once I started, I couldn't put it down. Evelyn, so 1-star review. Serial Fabulous writes books. Wow, just look up this guy. So I did. That was from February 23rd, 2024. I have no idea what this is about. Obviously, she did not read the book, whoever that is. Born Free, 5 stars, How Corruption Works. Reviewed April 2nd, 2024. This book really details how corruption works in Arizona, but not only. It is scary how the Mexican and Chinese cartels have penetrated all levels of the American society. And we'll get into that. Sunshine Taylor, 5 stars. Amazing book. December 2nd, 2023. I haven't come across a book like this before. It is a comprehensive and detailed account of how the Mexican drug cartels and local governments in America have been working together to exploit citizens and push society towards destruction. The book provides a thorough and in-depth analysis of the situation, explaining why American cities have become the way they are. The author's investigative techniques are replicable, and the book offers readers the opportunity to learn and use them. This makes it an essential read for anyone who wants to understand the scope of the problem and what can be done to tackle it. The author's personal story involving the abduction of his son adds to the gravity of the book. It highlights the impact that the drug cartels and corrupt local governments have on ordinary citizens' lives and the importance of addressing these issues urgently. In summary, this book is a crucial and timely expose that sheds light on the significant problem facing American society. I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the situation better and to contribute finding solutions. Now, let me point out something to you folks, which, most of you do not know. I have a Telegram channel called Stop Human Trafficking. Yeah. And you would think it would be like just this hub of activity, and it's really not, because not very many people concerned about human trafficking. Really aren't. You'd be surprised. People have more important things to do, like watch TV. So, right here, target, where's it at? Man, I lost it. I'll come back to it. I'll snap to it. Anyway, this one's from Jackie, a must read. November 27th, 2023. Report to the Governor is a book like no other. It is a combination of personal narrative, textbook, and investigative report with evidentiary documents to support each fact. It is an outstanding piece of literature and a phenomenal report of a 4-year investigation by one incredibly brave and brilliant author. Thaler has endured what no parent should ever have to endure in the Arizona judicial system. It is an embarrassment to the profession. If, after reading this book, the judges involved in Thaler's persecution and supporting the criminal ex-wife and family, and those who are fully versed in the goings on, do nothing to make this right, then they deserve the penalties that will inevitably be bestowed upon them. I strongly recommend every Arizona resident, and in fact, every American, should read this book and wake up to the reality that is America today. Drew Love Taylor, 5 stars. Yes. November 25th, 2023. The book discussed here provides a wealth of evidence about corruption that is hard to overlook. The evidence presented in the book is absolutely undeniable, leaving little room for doubt. Writing style is captivating, and the book is filled with anticipation that only grows stronger as the story unfolds. I personally found myself completely absorbed in the story. The book is an extensive probe into the matter of racketeering and corruption in the state of Arizona. It uncovers details that are both shocking and eye-opening. Authors have done a thorough job of conducting research and presenting their findings in a clear and concise manner. Overall, this book is an essential piece of reading material for anyone interested in understanding the intricate workings of corruption and racketeering in Arizona. It provides a detailed account of the events and exposes the truth behind the corruption, making it a must-read for anyone looking to gain a deeper insight into this issue. Okay? Now, I want to dive in because I have about 5 more minutes. Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. For those of you who are not familiar with this statute in Title 18, United States Code, Section 1961 through 1968. The Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organization, or RICO Act, is a United States federal law that provides for extended criminal penalties and a civil cause of action for acts performed as part of an ongoing criminal organization. This was created back in the 1970. I'm not going to go to the history. Summary. Under RICO, a person who has committed at least 2 acts of racketeering activity drawn from a list of 35 crimes, 27 federal crimes, and 8 state crimes within a 10-year period can be charged with racketeering if such acts are related in one of 4 specified ways to an enterprise. Those found guilty of racketeering can be fined up to $25,000 and sentenced to 20 years in prison per racketeering count. In addition, the racketeer must forfeit all ill-gotten gains and interest in any business gained through a pattern of racketeering activity. A U.S. attorney who indicts someone under RICO has the option of seeking a pretrial restraining order or an injunction to temporarily seize a defendant's assets and prevent the transfer of potentially forfeitable property, as well as to require the defendant to put up a performance bond. An injunction or performance bond ensures that there's something to seize in the event of a guilty verdict. And we saw this in Trump's trial in New York with Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, having him post that ridiculous $300 million bond. This provision prevented the owners of mafia-related shell corporations from absconding with assets. In many cases, the threat of a RICO indictment can force defendants to plead guilty to lesser charges, in part because the seizure of assets would make it difficult to pay a defense attorney. Despite its harsh provisions, a RICO-related charge is considered easy to prove in court because it focuses on patterns of behavior as opposed to criminal acts. Enterprise defined. There must be one of 4 specified relationships between the defendant or defendants and the enterprise. Either the defendants invested in the proceeds of the pattern of racketeering activity into the enterprise, or acquired or maintained an interest in or control of the enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, or conducted or participated in the affairs of the enterprise through the pattern of racketeering activity, or conspired to do one of the above. The United States Supreme Court noted that a commentator had used the terms prize, instrument, victim, or perpetrator for these 4 relationships. Civil suits. RICO also permits a private individual damaged in his business or property by a racketeer to file a civil suit. The plaintiff must prove the existence of an enterprise. The defendants are not the enterprise. In other words, the defendants and the enterprise are not one and the same. A civil RICO action can be filed in state or federal court. Both the criminal and civil RICO components allow the recovery of treble damages, triple the amount of the actual and compensatory damages, actual compensatory. Organized crime, everybody knows what organized crime is, what that looks like. State laws. As of 2014, 33 states, as well as Puerto Rico and the United States Virgin Islands, had adopted state RICO laws to cover state offenses under similar schemes. RICO predicate offenses, and I'll just blaze these real quick. Any violation of state statutes of gambling, murder, kidnapping, extortion, arson, robbery, bribery, dealing in an obscene matter, dealing in a controlled substance or illicit chemicals defined under the Controlled Substance Act, any act of bribery, counterfeiting, theft, embezzlement, fraud, dealing in obscene matter, obstruction of justice, slavery, racketeering, gambling, money laundering, commission of murder for hire, and many other offenses covered under the Federal Criminal Code, Title 18, embezzlement of union funds, bankruptcy fraud, and securities fraud, drug trafficking, long-term and elaborate drug networks can also be prosecuted using the continuing criminal enterprise statute, criminal copyright infringement, money laundering, and related offenses, bringing in, aiding, or assisting aliens illegally entering the country, acts of terrorism. There you go. These cases right here talking about the cowboy mafia, believe it or not, this one talking about 2 Cutter Bill Western stores. One of them was in the Galleria area, and it is now Treasure's Topless Bar, which I used to frequent very often. So I remember Cutter Bills. And then the latest is, of course, there's Trump University, there's Donald Trump 2023. And if you want, you should go read about the anti-SLAPP laws. And there you go. This is the end of it. The RICO statute contains a provision that allows for the commencement of a civil action by a private party to recover damages sustained as a result of the commission of a RICO predicate offense. There you go. I will stop share. I've done my introduction. I have John awaiting, and Christine was, and I don't know where she is. So, and for you guys' information, you're muted, John. I have not spoken to John. This is our first time to ever even see each other, and I wanted to keep it fresh because I listened to the complete interview that he did with Michelle Moore. So I'm going to give 2 thumbs up to that interview and Michelle Moore for conducting that. She didn't do very much questioning into the book or to the topic or into RICO itself or into your investigations. So I wanted to keep that fresh so we can go through that. And I've done an introduction for you. I don't know how much of the pre-production you caught that I did before I brought you on. But I covered your website, covered your books, how they can purchase them. Gave them a little brief synopsis of what's going on with you. So you're more than welcome to come on here and tell everybody who you are, what you're doing, and we can start from there. And I'll hit up Christine on the back end and see where she's at. I know she was on here waiting while I was doing the introduction. You're muted.
Now I'm unmuted. Hi, how are you?
Yes. How you doing? Thanks for being here.
The wonders of modern technology. Us poor lawyers used to dress up in suits and go down to court. Now we sleep in and we hit a Zoom button and there we are.
They're allowing y'all to do that now, right?
Not only are they allowing it, in some states like California, they actually encourage it. And they've set it up so almost every hearing can be done that way. I don't like it. I think the in-person thing is a much better deal, especially for trials. But where it's helped a lot is in experts and expert witnesses, where rather than having an expert sit around at $1,000 a day, on a bench outside a courtroom all day, instead, when you're ready to go to them, you just, call him real quick, tell him to get on Zoom, take his testimony right away, and it's much cheaper and much easier for everybody.
That makes sense. But the courtroom demeanor and the little ticks and behaviors and mannerisms and reactions.
Well, and of course, dogs barking in the background. You've had, especially with COVID, where people had to be at home. They used to say, it's horrible. Don't be at home when you make these calls to courts, et cetera. Then with COVID, everybody's dogs were always barking. And it just became kind of the joke of the thing is what can you do? Right.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, they've never sat through a trial, has been a participant either on the offense or defense or, as a party to the action. I have. So I've been there through the whole 9 yards. So I get it. So yeah, the in-court setting I think is very important. So I can understand why you frown upon getting away from that. Absolutely. Yeah, and I like being able to read both the 2 things: read the room as well as read the witness. I can tell, and any good trial lawyer can tell whether or not jurors are going along with you or not. Whether or not they're picking up on what you're saying, and you can find areas where they seem interested and cover more of those areas. If nothing else, then just to better establish a relationship with the jury. It's very hard to do that kind of stuff when everybody's on a Zoom call. Yeah, exactly. Before I came on, I actually didn't even have a chance to watch much of it. I saw about a minute. Before I came on, I was actually uploading onto my Twitter account. We've been working on voter rolls against falsified deeds and falsified names on deeds, and finding that, originally to give credibility to the fake name, to the phantom, who owns a piece of property, they were registering the phantom and putting them on the voting rolls to make them look like a real person. But what's happened over the years with voter fraud is that you now get these phantoms that own, thousands of properties, especially in like Maricopa County, Pinal County, Yuma County in Arizona, now also registered to vote and actually voting. So part of the voter fraud that we're looking into is the phantom individuals
whose names are on properties to launder, now also voting in elections. And I just posted an example of one for Pinal County, a Brittany Elizabeth Smith, who is entirely fake. We know exactly who that person is. We can match up the handwriting, but is also on the voter rolls and has been since 2015 and actually does vote.
Oh my God.
Yeah, we posted about 3 or 4 of these for Maricopa County. I think about a month and a half ago. We have access to the voter rolls, so we can actually see the official voter registration with the person's official voter registration number, as well as the name, the address associated with it, and what elections they voted in. And we can compare that to the deeds that we have on that person and show the falsified deed that the person isn't even real. It's a phantom. It's somebody using a fake name. And then, of course, they're still in the voter rolls and they're still voting for offices.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we do is very extensive and you can imagine, very time consuming, but we're very good at it. And, like I said, I think originally the reason for putting people on voter rolls was not to vote. It was to give a phantom individual a kind of an identity. You create a social media, you have them on Facebook, you have them on Instagram, you have them on Pinterest, and then, you have them in the voter roll. It makes them seem more real. Well, how can they be fake? But now that we have the handwriting comparisons and we know who's falsifying the deeds, for the money laundering, we now can compare them to actual voter rolls and what the actual voting is and see that they're actually voting. And so, in Arizona, we have no way yet, because we just don't have the audit capacity of knowing whether or not, that's a couple of hundred, which it is at least, or whether that's in the tens of thousands or more, which is entirely possible, especially since, this kind of, money laundering fraud goes back, 25, 30 years. So, in all these years to create the phantoms, put them on there, and then actually have them vote, you could be looking at tens of thousands of falsified votes that there'd be no way to detect. There's no system that could detect this, because as long as they're registered and as long as there's an official signature to compare it to, they can vote by mail-in ballot. So the person doesn't have to run. This is the problem with mail-in ballots. The person doesn't have to run from precinct to precinct to precinct and take out a different ID at each precinct. All they have to do is fill in the mail-in ballot and just sign anywhere close to the quote-unquote official signature, and that the one they used to register to vote, and then their vote is automatically counted. And there's no system set up to stop this problem.
Wow. And obviously, if somebody who's been to reporttothegovernor.com looked at the evidence that you provided in your excerpt and seen some of the man, I can't get it out today.
Yeah, the ineligible voting issues and the rest. Yeah, and also we did one of our videos in the investigation section includes in it the investigation of what we call the Fontes, appointment documents, which are the appointments in Maricopa County back between 2016 and 2020, actually 2017, 2020, when Adrian Fontes, who's now the Secretary of State of Arizona, was the county recorder for Maricopa County, during the 2020 presidential election. And what we have in there that goes even beyond that is falsified appointments. So for positions of election integrity, we have, I think, 18 total appointments made by Adrian Fontes in his role as the county recorder. 14 of those are falsified, where either the person doesn't exist, the person doesn't exist, but where the person doesn't exist and where the document itself has been falsified with a false notarization of the signature of the person, where if that person does exist, the signature of that person does not match the signature on the document, and where the clerk's signature also doesn't match. And what's worse is that in the case of the Fontes documents, not only do we find the names of individuals who were involved in other crimes that we investigated, so these names are reused over and over again, we found them in other crimes, but we also found that we could identify the person who committed the fake notarization on the document. We can identify that person. And then to make it even worse, normally when you get appointed to an election board or any county commission, the document gets recorded with the recorder's office within 2 to 3 weeks. Most of these were recorded anywhere from 4 to 16 months later, and most of them recorded after the 2020 election. So people who were allegedly appointed for election integrity purposes, say in January or February of 2020, didn't have their appointment recorded until December of 2020, about a week after certification of the election. So you didn't even have a way of knowing that these people existed prior to the certification.
Let me ask you.
Yeah, so we have a video presentation on that so people can see the documents in what's kind of a PowerPoint video with narrative. So you can go through and see exactly what we found and when we found it. We've got the arrows pointing, everything makes it very simple to follow the bouncing ball.
Right. And of course you have are you and Brittany still married?
One of the funniest stories of all, and I think I mentioned this in the book, is that anytime I go to a doctor's office and it says marital status, and it gives you boxes to check, I cross them all out and I write unknown.
Unknown.
We are still married because the two reasons. One was because the divorce case that actually got filed got falsified about halfway through the case. Every document in the case got falsified, including the decree. The decree is a fake document. So the entire case, about halfway through the case, the entire case got a new judge, and with a new judge and a new judge's assistant, every document from June 10, 2020 to the present, actually to the present, because there's still filings in this case, to the present, have all been falsified by the court. There's a whole section in the book on the falsified orders. For example, there are 16 motions that we filed that literally never to this day have gotten a response. Not a denied, not a granted, nothing. 16 of those. We have, I think, something like 20 where we not only got a response, but the denied to our motion response is a fake document with a fake signature of the judge, with a forged signature of the judge. And so we've got oppositions that we filed to motions where the court came back and said falsely, again, it's all fake, came back and said, no opposition having been filed. Wait, you mean that 50-page opposition didn't get filed even though it says it got filed? So we have that. We have decisions that were made in the falsified ones where they weren't made for, almost a year and a half. It's one fraud after another after another. We've got the whole system dead to rights. But the bigger problem is not even that. My case is totally, completely fraud. Like I said, from the first two, we had 3 judges in my case. The first judge went with me on everything. Case? Yeah, in the divorce case. Okay. First judge went with me on everything. Second judge granted me everything I looked for. The third judge wanted to do so and intended to do so, but his court got hijacked. And what's worse about it is not even my case getting hijacked. It's that along the process of this and the days before the case, when Brittany was still a cooperating witness and was still providing evidence, we've got thousands of falsified default judgments against people, against individuals. We have thousands of falsified or essentially modified falsely criminal restitution orders, custody orders, child support orders, spousal support orders, and stuff like that. We have enough, we can prove enough hacking and infiltration into the Maricopa County database to essentially shut down the Superior Court for the County of Maricopa. That's how bad this is. So if anybody out there in your audience has received a letter, lives in Arizona, has received a letter from a collection agency and thought, wait a minute, I don't remember this bill, I don't remember this credit card. What they do, and this is how insidious this is they break into your credit report, find something that you're delinquent on. If you're not, it's fine.
Who's they?
The cabal of the criminals who do this.
Okay.
Let's go back a step. My book covers, obviously, the big topic has always been the money laundering of drug money, and especially the money laundering through the sale of real property. But the money laundering takes other forms than that. And we talk about the different forms in the book. But in addition to that, we also uncovered bankruptcy fraud, payroll theft, insurance fraud, computer hacking, and essentially extortion. On the extortion end, it's all the same group of people. And on the extortion end, what you wind up getting is something kind of odd, which is the group gets into your credit report, finds out anything that was delinquent, creates a fake judgment These are, $5,000, $10,000 judgments. These are not huge judgments. These are like you didn't pay off a credit card. So they get into that, find people with, fairly low credit scores. So they usually have delinquencies, create a fake default judgment to make it look like the credit card company sued. Then creating fake lawyer letterhead, they send demand letters saying we're going to garnish your bank accounts if you don't pay us some money. And of course, people will pay, $1,000, $2,500, $3,000 to get this off of their credit. And that's how the extortion attempts work. And they're very successful because there's no way to know that the quote unquote judgment document you're getting is actually a falsified, loaded up into the system judgment.
Unless you know the word.
Yeah, it's a great scam because, like I said, as long as you have a quote credit company that can get into credit reports, look up social security numbers, look up people's names, get into their social security numbers. You take people with, say, between 600 and 650 on their credit score. So you don't want absolute deadbeats because they're not going to be able to pay you. But people with 700 and over are probably paying their bills. So you look for 600 to 650 or so. You pull off any delinquency on there, create a fake judgment, and then extort them for money, making them think that you're a law office looking for the cash.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's, and that's just one facet of it. There's the bankruptcy fraud, there's the payroll theft, where you create phantom individuals, you put them on the payroll, you have the paycheck direct deposited, usually into Wells Fargo accounts. You have several Wells Fargo bankers who are on the take, who for a few bucks will create the fake account with a fake social security number, et cetera. Monies get dumped in there. And then what's really fun is that not only is there a phantom employee taking about 30 grand a year, in some kind of paycheck that's direct deposited, but worse than that, they will sign up for the insurance benefits, for the group insurance benefits. So this usually happens with large scale employers, but they'll sign up for the insurance benefits, get the benefits, or at least have the application for the benefits, and in a whole number of cases die, where a fake husband, a phantom husband, comes in and collects on the insurance policy. And even at $30,000, a group insurance plan at a major employer is going to be can be anywhere between 5 and 10 times annual salaries. So a $30,000 salary can oftentimes net $300,000 in insurance. And of course, where does the pay for the insurance premium come from? Comes from the paycheck. Yep. So you're never paying from it. It's coming from the fake, being deducted from the real paycheck to pay the phantom employee. And we have found this not just in Arizona, we have found this in multiple states. And we have worked with companies like MetLife to try to clean this up. It's very pervasive. We now know what to look for, but this is part of the problem. So you get sketchy stuff like this. So we can talk about any of this that you want in more detail. But what we uncovered was not just the money laundering of drug money, but a whole systemic and systematic organized crime operation.
I would say so. How pervasive do you believe this is across the continental United States and even into North America as a whole?
Well, there's two things on this. The first is that it's huge across the country because most of the scams don't require much. When you think about the judgment scam for a moment. When you get a letter from a collections lawyer saying you didn't pay your Discover bill, your Visa bill, whatever it is, and you didn't pay it, the chances that you're going to discover that the judgment document that they've provided in that envelope along with the cover letter is fake is close to slim and none. And even if you thought it was fake, what are you going to do about it? If the court system has within its database that this is a real judgment, who are you going to go complain to? Who are you running to? You're going to spend what, $10,000 with the court to file motions with an attorney to set all this aside and vacate it because you think it's not real when it's a $3,000 or $4,000 judgment? It makes no sense. So the ability to catch this is so minimal. And this is a problem in every state. I mean, from the work we did, we found at least 20 other states with similar corruption problems as Arizona in terms of these kinds of schemes. And interrelated, where we found just the work that was being done in Arizona was being replicated by the same group of criminals in multiple states. We can tell you 20 different states where this is a problem. For the bankruptcy fraud, for example, we found it in 11 different states. For the election fraud, you're kind of seeing it, play out in real time, because the election fraud, especially for 2020, is a bigger deal. But you're seeing that as well, and you're seeing how that plays out. One of the things that we talk about in the book that I think is very important is that you don't have to corrupt the state to win an election, to win a presidential election, because of the electoral college system that Democrats say they hate so much. All you have to do is corrupt 6 counties throughout the United States. You only need to corrupt basically 6 counties. Give you an example. Maricopa County, which is Phoenix, has 60% of the voters. If you can corrupt the results in a county with 60% of the voters, you can corrupt the election results. So you don't need to corrupt every person. You don't even have to corrupt anybody at the state level. Corrupting simply county officials gets you the presidential election. If you can do that in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, where we've seen these very close election numbers go on, and where all of a sudden, especially with mail-in ballots, all of a sudden the numbers almost instantaneously flip. That's where you're seeing the corruption go on. One of the things that we examined that people I think sometimes forget is we examined over 27,000 entries into cell phone and text message records to see who was calling who. So once we knew who the bad guys were, we were able to access phone records to see now who's being called and when, what states. And of course, what we found is exactly what you would expect, was that the calls going back and forth were in the states that had the election fraud issues that have come up.
Wow. Nuts. Well, let me introduce Christine Scott, who just joined us. Don't mean to interrupt. I have another storm coming through Houston again. We had one yesterday that we had hail again. And this has hail in it already. So if this flickers and cuts off.
And my Wi-Fi was just cut off. And
Yeah.
so that's why I wasn't able to get on. So
There you go.
yeah.
Okay, Christine, tell everybody who you are. I've already done a pre-introduction. I went over your Ballotpedia information, introduce them to your Rumble website, give them basic. I haven't told them pretty much what you're doing with all your litigation, but go ahead and do that. And that way you can introduce John to yourself and what you're doing and who you are and why you're doing it. And you can talk about anything, because as soon as this is off, it's going off YouTube. So we can talk about it. Yeah,
because I'm incapable of censoring myself when it comes to anything. Doesn't mean I don't have a filter. 2 totally different things. So my name is Christine Scott. I have filed 3 Supreme Court cases. I don't know if they have any of them. None of them are showing up there. I just filed one on May 8th, which is on petitioning, and it has to do with petitioning on private property and public property, and what your rights are if the property is open to the public and quasi-public property. And I accidentally realized that the original Florida Constitution appears to still be in effect, and you should read the articles in the sections in Article 1 of the, I think it's 1835 Constitution. It might be 1828. It is absolutely incredible. The reason why they were bamboozled out of their constitutional state rights and told they had to conform to the U.S. Constitution is because the state constitution is so much stronger and so much more protective of the individual rights. So that's why I just filed on May 8th. So back in like maybe December 26th of, I want to say 01, I filed my first Supreme Court case. And that was on, can you see me, John?
I can see you. I think we may have lost him in the storm there for a moment.
Okay. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. A pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice meeting you. Yeah, I've heard a little about your story. It's come my way, obviously, because of what you're involved in. So it's fascinating to me. You know, obviously we've dealt, the book mostly deals with Arizona, but we've dealt with a multiple number of states now, you know, on these problems, especially on election problems and election fraud. So nothing new to us at all.
So what have you done or dealt with in Florida? What counties, what people, anything?
Well, one of the things we dealt with in Florida is the corruption issue, and especially the money laundering. We've investigated, you know, how monies flow through, you know, bribes to public officials, as well as drug monies, kind of the combo. Because what else are monies going to go in Florida except to bribe officials and for drugs? So we've done that.
Can I ask you to be more specific about that? Who are the individuals involved?
The individuals I wouldn't get into specifically, but I would say this. I'll put it this way. One of the people we've looked into, the people we look into tend to be ones who are on the top 10 wanted list for the DEA, top 10 wanted list for the FBI. So, which kind of is ever changing, but that's one of the groups of people we look into. Roberto Lopez, for example, who's one of the top crystal meth suppliers in the world, whose supplies go through Florida. We look through that. One of the things we looked at is doctors in southwestern Florida, you know, south of Tampa, essentially, who use their medical license to import drugs that then get shipped off across the country. And then the money that gets laundered coming back through Chicago for that. So, you know, we've looked at a number of these different things. My deal tends to, for other states outside of Arizona, tends not as much to focus on the specifics of the people unless I'm asked to do it. And in the case of Lopez, I was. But it's mostly to take a look at methods so that the methods can be stopped. Like, I'll give you an example. We have one whose name will come to me, but one who is, no, we got it back.
Hi, we're talking, Floyd, we're talking about methods. And we're talking about how to, go ahead, John.
Well, what we're talking about is just the basics of the, you know, the methods. And, you know, as I said, we're looking for ways that we stop this. So, for example, we look at the trucking system, and we look at how you know, trucks are used to haul the drugs across the country, where the stopping points are, what banks are involved, you know, what banking officials are involved, you know, so we do a lot of that. So it's less about the officials in states like Florida than it is about the methods to the madness and what law enforcement can do to stop it.
And do you find that they're being attentive to these matters, law enforcement?
Interestingly, some states yes, and some states no.
Which states,
you know, it's
yes?
interesting. Well, Arizona for sure is not attentive to anything because of the number of people being bribed and how bad the system is in Arizona. I mean, Arizona is almost a lost cause. But I have met over the last 5 years or so, you know, with this investigation, I have met with attorneys general in multiple states, and I have found one that the conservative states with conservative attorneys general have been far more attentive to the matter. You know, we've talked to Ken Paxton, obviously, in Texas. We have talked to, now there's a new one, but as of 2022, but we've talked repeatedly to the Attorney General's office in New Mexico. We've talked to the Attorney General's office in Wyoming, in Colorado, in Nevada. We've had a number of meetings in California with the Attorney General's office. You know, all essentially not just the specifics so that they can build cases, but also about, you know, what do you do to reform some of this to make this less likely to happen? You know, one of the things that we talk about in the book that I think is very important is that it's not that systems are created to help criminals. It's that every state has loopholes. And what criminals do is they find loopholes. And then once they find loopholes, what they do is they fight all legislation or any attempts to close the loopholes. So what happens
What
is
kind
that,
of loopholes?
well, a great example is in Arizona, for example, you have loopholes in terms of notaries. So a lot of the money transfers through fake individuals, and it's signed off on the deeds. It's signed off on by notaries who are fake, who don't exist, phantoms. Well, one of the problems is in Arizona, for until May of 2020, a notary was not required to put their number on their notary stamp. So one of the things is that if somebody came in with a stamp and stamped the document, you had no way of knowing if that notary was a real notary. You could look up the name, but you couldn't compare a number or see some form of ID to ensure that the notary was a real notary. So you had no way of knowing. Yeah, you had no way of knowing if the notary was a real person or not. So that was. Well, wait a minute. So here's what they did. So in 2020, came up with a bill that said, okay, notaries now have to put their numbers on their notary stamps. Okay. There's a problem with that, though, because in Arizona, notaries get two numbers. They get a lifetime number, which is a 7-digit number, and they get an every 4-year appointment number, which is a 6-digit number. Well, which number did the bill require that you put on your stamp? The 6-digit number. What's the problem with that? The identification in the Secretary of State's office for an individual who wants to look up a notary is based on the 7-digit number. So you basically are putting on the document an entirely worthless number.
I think they do this on purpose. This happens a lot where it's
right.
Like
well, it's a good example of how the system didn't matter for a long time. Then when it did, they come up with a bill to make it still totally useless. And of course, it's intentional. Right. And when you call, we had long discussions with the Secretary of State's office on this, with the notary department. And we said, so if I want to confirm a notary, I got to stop what they're doing. I got to call you on the phone. I got to compare what number you have to what number they tell me they have, and go through a half-hour process just to confirm that my notary is a real notary. Yep, that's the case. So those are things. I'll give you another interesting example. It's kind of an odd one, but an interesting example. We were talking before you came on about court fraud issues. And one of the things that Arizona does that other states do not is if you file a motion, there's no hearing. There are some things that require by law to have hearings. There's some types of motions that require it. But most motions that you bring in any case, whether it be criminal or criminal a little more so, but criminal and absolutely in civil and in family law, do not require the court to do anything but 30 days later issue a decision. So you submit your papers, the opposition side submits their papers, 30 days later you get granted or denied. There doesn't have to be an explanation. So one of the problems is you have no way of knowing whether the order that you just got that denies your motion is a real order or a forged order. You have no idea if the judge ever actually even saw your papers because there is no oral argument. In California, that would be impossible. In California, if I file a motion, there's going to be an oral argument. I'm going to talk to the judge about this motion. And he might take it under submission, he might rule from the bench, but I'm having a conversation with the judge. I know the judge saw my papers. He may not have read them, very carefully. You get all sorts of issues, but at least I'm having a face-to-face with the judge. I know that the judge's ruling comes from the judge. In Arizona, because you don't have oral argument, you write papers, the other side write papers, 30 days later, there's a decision. You have literally no way of knowing whether or not the judge actually saw the document, whether or not that decision actually came from the judge. And so you have cases that are—
whether or not the judge even knows about it.
Yeah, if the judge doesn't even know about the motion, let alone, sometimes even the case. And so what we have found is that the judge's assistant, the JA program, is entirely corrupted, especially in the criminal court system. So that judges, it's not even the judge's fault. It's not even the judges being bribed. It's that on red flagged cases, the judge never even sees the papers.
Right. So, okay. And this is a problem in Florida. The clerk's office and the JA works with the clerk is just completely corrupt. So when you're looking at those, this says to admit, Floyd. Okay. So when you're looking at the records of the judges, I think you also need to look at the records of the clerks and the JAs.
Right. Well, that's what we do. In fact, what we've done is, and our book talks about it, we looked at a number of JAs where decisions had clearly been falsified, where the signature of the judge was a forgery, et cetera, et cetera. We actually did look at that. And there is no question. There's no question. We actually name several JAs in the book specifically because they are getting paid off to block documents. But the other problem, too, is the infiltration. It's not just from the JAs who obviously have access. We found in Maricopa County, for example, which is Phoenix, we found that not only is the system, the entirety of the Maricopa County system hacked, but it was designed that way. So it's really an infiltration. It was designed that way. So
I think we have the same problem in Florida.
Yeah. So we have found multiple occasions. I mean, multiple, I'm talking hundreds, not just like 5. We've found hundreds of occasions, maybe thousands if we could look deeply enough, where it's not even just that the decision is phony or falsified. It's that the judge may have actually written a decision before it got uploaded and made public so that the parties could see it. It got downloaded by the JA, modified, and then reloaded. And so we've actually found both in, and this is a big area, is in child custody, but certainly in child support. We have found a volume of falsified orders where obviously there's children. I mean, you're not paying a child support order if there's no kids.
Let me stop you for just a second. I have a similar problem in my cases. What happens is I e-file my documents and they are changed. My documents are changed. And a lot of times it can be just a word from not, they take out the word or they add the word not. It gives an opposite meaning. So it's not just the orders and whether or not a judge has actually seen it, but it's the documents that we're filing as well.
Right, exactly the point. And that's one of the problems. So that you have things like on child support orders, a party is going to be ordered to pay child support. You know, just because that's standard. Somebody's making this much money, they're going to pay child support. What they do is they hire one of the criminals, one of the miscreants, to modify the order. So if they're going to be required to pay child support, they have the order modified to make it a lesser amount. If they're going to be receiving child support, they pay to have the order changed to increase the child support. And of course, the court doesn't know the difference because, you know, by the time you get around to trying to thinking, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. The order doesn't follow the numbers. It doesn't follow my income. It doesn't make any sense. By the time you figure out the problem, the judge doesn't remember what he or she didn't do. He goes back and he looks at the quote unquote order and he just assumes that's what he did. There's no way he's going to remember. So you have a lot of this in the system. I mean, these are the problems. The system.
Okay, how do we fix that? You and I both know this exists.
One easy way to fix this. Easy way to fix this is to require hearings, to not be lazy, and actually require. It can be, you know, the judge just says like 5 minutes.
We have hearings in Florida, and the clerks and JAs totally run circles in this. Okay.
Well, the problem it depends on, but you don't have to do it that way. The way, for example, and this is one area where California had a corruption problem and fixed 90% of it. Doesn't mean we don't have bad judges. You know, you always get good and bad judges. But California actually had a system that's very similar to like today's Arizona system, with a city court system where judges were appointed by the city council, and their one job was to make money for the city. And then you had the superior court system, which was, you know, all the major stuff. We took this out years ago. The manner in which judges are appointed, change that function. The manner in which JAs are background checked, change that. The manner in which motions are heard, change that. I mean, you're never going to stop all corruption, but you're going to stop 90% of it. If, for example, if I'm in a hearing with a judge and the judge makes a ruling right there, I could disagree with him, but it's him saying it. I'm watching him say it. It's obviously his ruling. So you can't get away with just, you know, a denied when the motion should never have been denied. I mean, we have things denied, like, for example, we had in one case a judge who had a settlement conference with the parties that was recorded, fortunately, so everybody knows what everybody said. It was recorded. They had a settlement conference. The judge that couldn't be settled. The judge said, all right, I'm going to allow 6 weeks of discovery. And then at the end of discovery, if there isn't a settlement between the parties, either party, but obviously the one with the moving papers, can apply for a hearing, and we'll have an evidentiary hearing, an actual in-court, argue the evidence hearing. Great. 6 weeks later, the other side is not cooperating in discovery. A motion for trial is made. And about 7 months later, not 30 days later, but 7 months later, there's a no good cause having been shown, request for hearing denied. You can't do that. The law in Arizona requires the hearing. The judge acknowledged he was going to hold a hearing. How do you have this denied thing? So one of the things is that these motions should have to come with hearings, even if it's a 20-second thing for the judge to say, I got the motion, here's the date of your hearing.
Hold on, you just said you can't do that, which means that the fact that they did do it violated the law. How can we then address that? I just had this happen. I just
Well,
went to
that's
court.
easy. Look, in this
Okay.
particular case, and I'll be bringing a motion to the court on this probably next month, probably in June or early July. There'll be something called a petition for special action that I'll be filing in Maricopa County that will cover the specific set of issues. And what we will be doing is going through an entire series of cases, series of problems to explain exactly what's going on and exactly why it can't go on, et cetera.
And who will you be explaining that to?
If you go, look, this is easy. If give you an example, custody petitions, or modification petitions require by law that there be an evidentiary hearing. Has to be one. There's no such thing as no good evidence or anything like that. Has to be one under Arizona law. So when one doesn't happen, when you simply get a motion for hearing denied, which there cannot be, there has to actually be a hearing. You can go to the appellate court. And look, if everybody in the state is totally corrupt, then it doesn't matter anyway. It doesn't matter what laws I change. If they're not going to follow the law because they just decide not to, it doesn't matter what law I create.
Let's say we're there. Let's say that you've got everybody in the loop that's dealing with you totally corrupt. They maybe not everyone in the state's corrupt, but everyone that's on your stuff is corrupt because they know who you are. So they're making sure that you get the corrupt guys. How do we deal with that at that point then?
You don't look, I want to say you don't look. You can always, we have methods, we've created algorithms. We do things where we can figure out who's corrupt in about 10 seconds. And, unlike I think most others, we've been pretty, I think, courageous in specifically listing people who we know to be corrupt. I mean, I think my book has a list of 70 people. When we made the presentation to the legislature in February 2023, we came with a list in hand. We said, here's corrupt people, and here's how we know they're corrupt. And if you want to go through the evidence of each and every one of these people to see how we got there, call us. We'll sit down with you. We'll show you the evidence step by step by step by step. Here's the evidence. Here's how we did it. This is the methodology.
Did anyone call you?
Yes. One. Other than the person who invited us to come that day, who obviously, Liz Harris, who obviously, knew what we were doing. Yes, one very brave state senator is directly involved in going through my book. I mean, literally page by page, line by line, piece of evidence by piece of evidence. And he and I have worked together and will work together on making, changes in the law. Now, whether or not you can get them past a corrupt governor is obviously an issue. Whether or not you can get them through the legislature is an interesting issue. But the bottom line to it is that you have to start somewhere. And even if you can't get them through the legislature, one thing you can do, I was talking about this to someone else today, most states, including Arizona, have a referendum system. So you can put matters on the ballot. So if you want to change, for example, a great example is one of the things is not so much get the judge after they've been corrupt and they're on the bench. It's keep corrupt people from getting on the bench. The system in place for how judges, not so much the city courts, which are totally controlled by city council. That's a different problem. Well, actually, let's start with that. City councils hire judges for the city courts. They're hired and fired. They are not elected. Their job is to make money for the city. If they're not making enough money for the city, their contract is not renewed, they're fired, another person is hired. So their obligation is to make money for their employer. That's it. California had this for a long time. It got rid of it. It got rid of the city court system. It made the city court into what they now call the municipal court in California, or court of limited jurisdiction. And it all goes through the superior court system. How the judge is picked, how the judge is hired, how the judge is reviewed before they're hired, to being elected. So they're now on all one system, which is a fairly complicated system to get yourself on the bench. It's not easy to get on the bench. But the difference is in Arizona, for example, there's no system. The system essentially is that counties pick their own judges, even though they're not supposed to. And the way they do it is, rather than there be a state committee, that the governor forms, with 10 people on it, most of whom are lawyers, obviously, who review, and the bar that comes out with a report, is this person good or bad? Peer reviews that say whether or not this person is qualified and has the temperament to be a judge. None of that exists in Arizona. In Arizona, here's what they do. For Maricopa County, there are 10 supervisorial districts. So there are 2 individuals from each district, total of 10 people, 2 people from each district, one a lawyer, one a non-lawyer. And so what you have going on is that not only are they corrupt, but the bigger problem is that if I'm in, say, the Queen Creek area or the Gilbert area, and my partner and I in crime here decide we want Joe Smith to be a judge, well, then what's going to happen is the two guys from the Avondale, Goodyear, Buckeye area are going to say, all right, well, we want our guy to be a judge. All right, we'll support your guy. All right, you support our guy. There is no formal review process. As long as they are in good standing with the bar, as long as they haven't been disbarred, they are qualified. There's no peer review. There's no process of anything. Those names go on a list. They go up to the governor signs off. So even though the governor technically makes the appointment, governor doesn't know any of these people. And there's no formal reports on them, including peer reviews, that tell you that this is the right person to be on the bench. So it's fraught with this corruption, because what they then do is they go to people who are prone to the corruption. They go to lawyers who have been practicing for about 10 years, who have very mediocre practices. They're not making nothing, but they're not big time lawyers.
Yes.
They go to them, they offer them a crap load of money to buy up their practice. And then they do things we talked about in the book, where they then provide them with, in essence, phony mortgages, so they can upscale their house. They can go from that 2-bedroom, 2-bath house to a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, in a nicer neighborhood. They're given falsified mortgages that look like real mortgages on paper. They're given other benefits to get on the bench. Well, if you're making, $100,000 a year as a lawyer, and you're working all sorts of hours, especially if you're doing criminal, which a lot of the judges come from, gee, how great is it to sell your business for $500,000, which it isn't worth, and then be able to get a favorited mortgage, for a $500,000 house in the greater Phoenix area. And with that, even more importantly, with that, a mortgage that you don't really even have to pay, or where the amount you pay is not what's on paper. So it's
I very much feel that this is the situation with many judges here in Florida, and the judge that I just dealt with. And you look at something called a Form 6, which is their financial disclosure, public financial disclosure records. And sometimes it looks very shady. And the woman who works with you, is her name Bridget?
Wait, which person who works with me?
Bridget, she did the hearing in New Hampshire.
Jacqueline Breaker.
Jacqueline, yeah, in Arizona. She talked about that, the different kinds with annuities and different loans, and some of this
exactly.
stuff.
Exactly. I mean, and it's not a one size fits all. I mean, but the first problem is that you don't have a system of any real review. And the review, to the degree that it happens, is the two guys saying, I want my guy to be a judge. There's no state review. There's no bar recommendation here. I get these things can all be corrupted, but just the kinds of safeguards that are built into other states don't exist. I mean, you should at least be doing the bare minimum. And so when you see states like this that don't even cover that, you've got a problem. And so that's essentially what we're dealing with here.
So our judges in Florida are elected unless if a seat becomes vacant, and then they are appointed by the governor. Okay. And I had a case in 18, maybe 19. And they actually held it off. It was a bogus sham, but they held it off until they could bring in a different judge from a different county. And it was a lateral move, even though there were a whole ton of judges that were qualified and did that there. But they brought her in, okay? And this was DeSantis who made the lateral move with her, all right? And then after that, she was nominated by DeSantis, and she just blew the case. There was no reason for it, except it's just deep state stuff going on with me and my cases and stuff. Okay, so they brought her in to make sure that she ruled in the way that they wanted. Then she, I guess, threw her hat in, and DeSantis appointed her to be on the Florida Supreme Court. Okay. Now she had been a lawyer. She'd been a lawyer for 1.7 months, and she had been a judge. Sorry, for 1.7 months. She had been a lawyer for less than 10 years. You have to be a lawyer for 10 years to be on.
Usually,
She's a Black lady. She wasn't born in the States. There were 20. I think there were there were dozens of other Blacks who were eligible. This woman wasn't even eligible, okay? But it went to her anyway. Now, this is an appointment, okay? He appointed her. She didn't get it because she wasn't qualified yet. As soon as another seat came available, she got it. And what happens with the appointments can be the same kind of corruption. I mean, there were lots of people who were qualified for that job, who had years of experience on the bench, who were well respected. She wasn't even liked. Okay. And she's on the Supreme Court now. So you can still, even though it's through appointment or through election, we don't have clean elections.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I say. You know, if you talk about like what can be done, it's not as much about trying to, to take off the bench, a third of the lawyers. I mean, a third of the judges. I mean, you shut down the entire system if you try to do that. But where the problem certainly comes in, and it's where it's a big problem, is keeping this from going forward. This is a year after year after year problem, and if you could just make some minor changes to how things are done, like I said, require, even if it's 10 seconds, require a 1-minute hearing, even just to require the judge to announce his decision. So that the two lawyers are on Zoom.
The problem
and the
now,
I've read the motion, I've read the opposition. I'm denying the motion. At least it came from the judge. I mean, this is stuff that doesn't take up much court time, probably less time than writing out the freaking decision.
Yeah. Okay, so in Florida, you can have hearings, right? There are some things that you're not going to have a hearing on, like a motion for extension of time, right? So, but for anything with substance, you can have a hearing on it. But you still have the JA and the clerk.
Well, that's why I say you can't. Look. Part of the problem is that you even if they didn't set aside time to argue, even if somebody decided not to do that. I mean, the best of all worlds would be you prepare motions. There's a hearing date. You get 5 minutes each to tell your version of the story in front of the judge. It can even be by Zoom, but you get to tell your story. The judge is there. He makes a decision. He tells you the decision, unless it really has to be under submission. The judge tells you the decision. I mean, you at least know everything's on the up and up. It doesn't mean that things weren't played with, things weren't, changed. But at least that makes it a lot harder, because right now, all you have to do is force the judge's signature on a document and say denied or granted, and it's denied or granted. The judge has no way of knowing that that's what he did or didn't do. He's got too many cases. There's no way to know this. So you can solve some of the basic problems with stuff like that. You can, as I said, you can solve some of the problems about who becomes judge by just setting up a system that almost every other state has. I mean, one of the things is that, if you study political science, really study political science, and you study public administration, you go and you get that master's or PhD in public administration. One of the things that you do is you look at where these screw-ups occur. And you look at states that have figured out a way to solve them. These things come with solutions because some states have done an excellent job of solving the problems. Well, for example, like I said, California had this problem where California had this exact problem with city court judges, with judges who were, essentially hired and fired by city councils, who were basically put there as bill collectors, essentially, and how much money they brought in by fining people. Whether it be a traffic issue or whether it be, a misdemeanor or infraction issue, how much they billed people was the dependence on whether they were rehired for the following year. They weren't subject to voters. They weren't subject to any other review other than city council. California got rid of it. They totally dumped out the entire city court system. I mean, those are things you can do. And California was very successful. I mean, look, you can always bring a suitcase of cash to a judge. But barring a suitcase of cash to a judge in California, the judge is not likely to be somebody who was bribed. Very, 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 very unlikely. Suitcase of cash,
just
for
FYI,
sure.
I'm from California, and my ex took me to court in California over our daughter. And oh, wow. I do not believe that is straight up at all.
One of the problems you definitely have in California is that you can be, I saw that you were born in Glendale.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting, I mean, I was born and raised in Encino. So
yes. And yeah.
So okay. I get this very well. One of the problems is I don't do a lot of family law. The family law I do nowadays tends to be work with retrieving abducted children. If you know my whole story, you know I have a child who was abducted and all this. So you know a lot of what we do, you know, that I do in family law is really generally where there's an abducted child that needs to be returned, that kind of thing. We just got one the other day. We just located one, found one, and did a reunification with the father the other day after the mother abducted the child for 2 years. So I generally do that.
Congratulations.
But one of the problems, hey, he's back. One of the problems we have in the family court system in California is that you can be in, say, somewhere like Van Nuys. I'm sure you know the Van Nuys courthouse. You can be in Van Nuys where you have 4 courtrooms next to each other with 4 family court judges. And you can be in one with a female judge who thinks that men have been screwed out of having their kids for years and that every guy should at least have 50-50 with their kids. You could go to the courtroom next to it and get a female judge who thinks anything with a penis is the root of all evil and that men shouldn't have it at all. So you can get these horrifically inconsistent decisions.
Sure.
And that's one of the problems. You know, we get these totally inconsistent decisions depending on what judge you get. And that shouldn't happen. There are things that courts have tried to do to try to make decision-making more consistent.
Those weren't really the kinds of problems that
but
I had in my case. And it was
Yeah.
actually downtown Los Angeles where we went because we lived in West Hollywood.
Yeah.
But it was more, I think it had to do with his father's, you know, some people.
Yeah, I
have
mean, look,
power and
I've
that
seen
kind of
I've
stuff.
seen people with influence or with some level of relationship with the judge. I mean, I'll tell you a funny story about this. When my first wife and I, when we got a divorce after 17 years of marriage, it was a very unnecessarily ugly divorce. I actually talk about it in the book. It was a very unnecessarily ugly divorce that didn't need to be. We had one child. It should have always just been 50-50, just split everything. She's an executive, a professional. This was just not something that should have been an issue. And she, for a number of different reasons, made it an issue. And we got the one judge in the system who you never wanted to piss off. We got Judge Maren Nelson, who was one of the best judges in the system. She ran the department for several years. No nonsense. And absolutely hated my ex-wife. I mean, just hated her with a passion for what she was doing, for what she was filing, on and on and on. Just didn't like her at all. And you know what happened was ultimately I got, without doing a thing, I got absolutely amazing rulings against my former spouse, including support that I didn't ask for, including retro support I didn't ask for, 50-50 with our son, on and on and on. I mean, just killed her badly. And so in subsequent years, now I'm arguing cases in front of this judge. So I have a judge who had a stack of papers, you know, this big, saying all these horrible things. I'm a horrible person and did horrible stuff and on, who I'm now appearing in front of, you know, on very, very, very heavy duty cases. And fortunately, you know, she very much liked me to the point where I did very well in front of her in the rulings, you know, to a degree. You know, to a degree that I don't believe that, you know, that I might have gotten otherwise. So I'm not sure she was sympathetic to my plight or just thought I was really, really smart and knew what I was doing. But, you know, I had other lawyers who didn't even want to go into court with me, with her on the case, because they were afraid they were going to get, pardon the expression, get shit on as well. So, you know, you have these kinds of relationships. My father, who practiced family law and entertainment law for 50 years, was very well known in Los Angeles. I mean, very well known. So much so that I would go skiing in Mammoth and my last name would be on my skis. And I'd ride up the chairlift and there'd be a guy, you know, I'd be like, you know, college age or whatever. And there'd be somebody in their 30s or 40s riding up the chair with me who I didn't know. He'd look at the name and he'd look at me and he'd say, "Your father's Howard Thaler, isn't he?" And before I'd answer, I'd look to see how far down the fall would be, you know, just in case. But I would have this happen, you know, where I would just be skiing and my name would be, "Oh, your father, did he represent you or the wife?" "Oh, no, he was my lawyer. It's okay." Okay, great. I'm not falling off the chair today. But it would be that bad. So my father also trained a lot of the judges, which meant that he had good relationships with them. Now, I don't know how much deference he specifically got because of that, but you get the deference to some degree because if they know who you are, they know your integrity, they know that you're not arguing crap, they know you really read the law, they know that, you know, you're putting forth, decent legal arguments, you're going to get that. And so over the years, when I would appear in court, now most of those judges are long retired, or gone. But when I would appear in court and I would get one of my father's friends as a judge, they at least knew I was coming into their courtroom prepared. I knew my case. I wasn't making, bullshit arguments. I wasn't making up the laws as I went along. And so the difference I would get tended to be in there. That you're not going to solve, and especially in smaller towns. You go to small towns in Texas, you're not solving this problem. You go to small towns in Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, you're not solving for some of that familial problem. It's not going to happen. These folks are friends. They they go to the clubs together. They dine together. Their wives are friends. You're not going to change much of that. But you can change, like I said, you can change how appointments are made. That's a big deal. You can change the fact that you never appear in front of the judge, so you have no way of knowing if the actual ruling is a real ruling or not. There's some minor things you can change that at least make the frauds much harder to do. I can't know for sure that the papers I submitted are exactly what the judge is seeing. I don't know if something was taken out. I can't say, judge, do you have 13 pages? I have 13 pages. I mean, it's impossible to do that. But at least making it a requirement that there be the interaction between judge and parties makes some of the way they do fraud a lot harder.
I don't actually think that's impossible to fix. I think that's actually a really easy fix, because you're submitting online, it's being scanned online, and it would be very easy to create a app, so to speak, that would identify that same, hold on one second, that would identify that same document every single step of the way and make an alert if anything changes at any stage.
Well, so we've actually done that. Let me explain how we've done it. We've actually done that. What we did, and we have this in the book, it's in the footnotes. We actually have documents where we've done this. There's two ways in which we could prove that certain documents were false. Single page documents are a little bit tougher, but multiple page documents such as judgments, decrees, things like that, we were able to prove were modified using what's called pre-flight software. If you're not familiar with it, I'll explain it, but we were able to do this using something called pre-flight software. Pre-flight software is something that graphic artists use all the time. And the more graphic work you do, the more sophisticated program you'll use. What pre-flight software essentially does for graphic artists is it makes sure that everything is in the points that they need, and the style that they need. There's no screw up of style. They didn't use, New Times Roman and only Times Roman here. That everything, that the pictures are at least 300 DPI and not off the internet at 72 DPI. It does all this stuff for you. So it tells you what's wrong with your document, stuff that you can't so easily visually see. If you have lines that don't line up properly because something was cut and pasted, so you have one line that's slightly tipped and the other lines are straight, it'll pick up on all these flaws in the document, so you don't go to print, spending tens of thousands of dollars printing something and then have it all screwed up. What we use it for, and we use a very particular version of it, is we can look at any document that's been filed, and of course almost all of it is scanned up into the computer system. So we can actually pull the document off the system, and we can actually look at the document and tell you, for example, if you're using a scanner that's 300 DPI, then the initial scan of the judgment document or the order document is going to be 300 DPI. Every page should have been scanned at the same time, so it should all be 300 DPI. If say we have a 5-page document, if one or two of those pages is in 200 DPI, we know those pages were put on at a different time. Because otherwise, that initial scan should have all been 300 DPI. It was all scanned at the same time on a 300 DPI.
Can you bring in the modifications as a 300 DPI also, so that you would not be able to see the difference?
Yeah, you wouldn't see the difference in the document, because the flattened document, unless it's a graphic, you're not going to know that something's in 200 DPI and another page is in 300. You're not going to notice it by your eyesight, but the program picks it up. Another thing, for example, let's assume you and I are working on a document together. Like, for example, I'll do a settlement agreement, or another lawyer will do a settlement agreement, and I'll make changes. I just did a prenup for somebody where the other side wrote up the prenup and I had to make a number of changes and modifications to it. Well, the obvious way that lawyers like to do this is you send back and forth Word documents, and you put, you redline and stuff. So you'll do one copy redlined and then maybe a copy with the change the way you want. So they can see exactly on one version what you cut out, what you changed, etc. I mean, you're doing this on purpose. You want them to know what you took out, what words you took out, what phrases, what sections. You want them to do this. And then you provide them with a clean document, which is the document without the red line material in it. And to say, is this okay? Do you like the changes? That's pretty obvious. But for example, if you and I are working on a document together and we're both using Times New Roman 12 points, okay? You would think that it looks exactly the same. You're using Times New Roman 12. I'm using Times New Roman 12. Let's assume, for sake of argument, we're both doing this on PCs. We're doing this on a Windows program. We're using Word. Very straightforward. You would think it looks the same. Pre-flight software will pick up what you wrote and what I wrote, because it'll pick up that the Times New Roman you used was 12.03 and the Times New Roman I used was 12.05. So something that the eye is not going to pick up, but the change itself is something that the pre-flight software can, even down to stuff like that. So if somebody erased material, let's forget in the lineup of stuff for a moment. If somebody erased material, erased a sentence, or added a word to a sentence, that kind of thing, you're going to have a slightly different font size than me. So if we did this document in Times New Roman 12, and you took out 5% and made it 15%, to say you did something as simple as that. My pre-flight program is going to pick up that right at that spot, it went from 12.05 on my program to the 12.03 on yours. And it's going to give me a report that points right to it and says, here's a difference. So the ability now to modify documents is much, much tougher. The problem, of course, is people have to do it. You're not going to get, the chances of getting somebody in the system to do this, getting, an ombudsman or somebody is still subject to the same corruption. So unless I, as the user, as the party to the case, can do this, it's not going to make any difference whether or not you have some central person who does it, because they can be paid off. But this is how we do it. So like when we were talking, when Floyd and I were talking before about falsified judgments, he asked me, am I divorced or not? And I said, no, the decree is phony. One of the ways we know the decree is phony is not just because it has forged signatures on it. That's easy. But because we use, and I'll explain it a little bit again for Floyd, who's back on with us, we use something called pre-flight software. And the pre-flight software will pick up any modification or change to the document. So in the case of my quote unquote decree, there's a number of problems with the decree, just in the language and how it was written. But it also, we can tell this decree was written almost a year before my case ever came about. We can tell exactly what sections were literally taken out. We can tell you what sections were put in the document later on. We can tell what words were changed. We can tell what numbers were fudged. We can tell the difference, and then we have pages where we have this problem of 300 DPI versus 200 DPI. So we can see specific pages, rather than try to erase a line, which is very difficult. They just recreated the page and typed in, tried to do the same font. So the documents say in Times New Roman. They then type, that page again in Times New Roman. The problem is not only is that page not the same DPI, that page is going to be in that 12.05 versus the rest of the document being in 12.03. And the pre-flight software is going to pick this up. So those are things that, individuals can do, who learn it, can do it. So if you think that something doesn't make sense in your case, we can take a look at that in 5 seconds and tell you whether you're right or wrong. We can tell you if the document's been falsified or been changed, modified, reloaded, etc. We also found this, for example, in the recorder's office side. We found this with deeds, where a deed would be recorded, and then when there was an application to try to get Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac to buy the loan, the deed would get modified. So whatever modification was needed to sell the loan, which was often not even a real loan, but sell the loan to Freddie or Fannie, they would pull the document offline, modify it, put in different information, change numbers on it, etc., to make it qualify for Freddie or Fannie. Then reload the document and sell the loan. And the problem is that
who's they?
All the people I talk about in my book.
The corrupt individual, whoever they are.
All the people, the individuals I talk about in the book. So the they in this was, the Chavez crime family, for lack of a better term. So we call them the Chavez crime family. So what the Chavez crime family would do is you'd load up a deed on a property, a trust deed on a property, so a loan document deed on a property. And the trust deed would say, the rate and the terms and on and on and on. And it would always obviously be a conforming loan, which used to be a lot less than it is now, but it would always be a conforming loan. Then what they would do is that when they wanted to sell off the loan, they would pull the document off, change the wording in the document, change terms in the document that didn't meet Freddie and Fannie qualifications, change those terms, reload the document. So the document would look like it was recorded on its original date, but it was actually modified to sell to Freddie or Fannie. Now, if the person who has the property and has the loan, never defaults on the loan, then the fact that there's changes in terms and conditions of the document, as long as it's not obviously how much you pay per month, as long as it's not something like the interest rate, you're not going to know that somebody changed your document. You're not going to know that somebody modified terms in your document to make it saleable to Freddie or Fannie. You have no way of knowing this, because if you pay the loan every month, it never comes up. So we found a number of these. We actually did a video on this. We found a number of these where we found, especially again with Wells Fargo, where documents had been recorded, about a year later downloaded, modified to meet Freddie and Fannie requirements, reloaded into the system, and then the loan sold off to Freddie and Fannie.
Incredible. Let me ask you this. Your what's the software called again?
It's called Pre-Flight software.
Is it available?
Anybody who does graphic artwork can usually will find that with any of their graphic artwork packages, especially talking about the real professional level, Adobe Acrobat, for example, comes with a very high, the pro version comes with a very high-end Pre-Flight software. Pre-Flight is just a term.
Is it called Compare? Because Adobe has something called Compare. Yes. Okay. So you can see all the history on it, and that's happened.
Yeah. You can see everything. And what it does is it allows you to run remember, this is originally designed for graphic artists, so they don't go printing something where they took a photo off the internet and it was 72 DPI, and then they print it up and the whole thing is blurry and it was made for graphic artists, but it's so precise now that we use it. And now a lot of the major, like our forensic question documents examiner, Linda Mitchell, who's one of the best in the business, she now uses it. We never did it before. She never did it before. Based on the work that we were doing in the book and stuff that she was looking at, we started using this more and more. We do a lot of insurance fraud and bank fraud cases. So, application documents and loan documents, et cetera, are often things that are very big in what I do. I mean, obviously, I don't do this all day on my case and on the book. I mean, I work for a living. And so we do a lot of very heavy duty, multi-million, if not billions of dollar, fraud cases. And so one of the things that we want to look at always is we look at signatures on documents. We look at whether or not terms and conditions were changed, on and on and on. And so the Pre-Flight software is something that now forensic QDEs are now using consistently to tell whether or not a document has been modified at some point. And like I said, some modifications are easy. Like we'll see a document literally where the lines are across, and then all of a sudden there's a slightly crooked line. But I'll give you another example of this. We have this on my website, and something I've talked about a lot is the Medicaid fraud. In Arizona, they do something that other states don't do, and that is that if you have a treatment lien, if you're in a car accident and you go treat somewhere, there's a treatment lien that's pretty common for everywhere, where you say, I'm going to, the doctor gets his money first, when we settle the accident. I mean, very straightforward. But what they do in Arizona is they actually require that the lien be recorded. So unlike other states, treatment liens are actually recorded, whether it's from a hospital or a doctor or a chiropractor or whomever it's from, the lien actually gets recorded. Now, what we were able to find was over 20,000 falsified Medicaid liens. And one of the ways that we found them and found that they were falsified was that the notary stamp, which would normally be, straight up and down on the document, was instead tilted slightly. But it wasn't just tilted slightly on one document or 5 documents. It was tilted on over 20,000 documents. So 20,000 documents, you could put them on top of each other and the notary stamp would be in the exact same position. And what that meant was that the notary stamp essentially was a graphic. It was not a stamp at all. So it was done in a kind of in a factory printing press system, not by an actual notary.
And misconduct, how are you able to address it to remedy the problem?
Well, with Medicaid, you can, Medicaid obviously is both a state issue and a federal issue, because Medicaid monies come from the federal government. So you can have both federal investigators and state investigators. And one of the things that we try to do is not so much rush to the FBI, not because we don't like them necessarily, but we don't so much rush to the FBI, but oftentimes you can rush to the department in charge. For example, Health and Human Services runs the Medicaid department. You can go to the Inspector General for Medicaid, and you can share with the federal Inspector General the work, and they will do the investigation. Great way to get around some of the problems of, you know, how we look at the FBI today, how we look at certainly state officials today. You can go actually to Inspector Generals of the departments. It is harder when it's a state issue. And one of the reasons, there's two reasons for this. One is because a state like Arizona, the level of corruption is so severe that you don't know where you're going to go and who's not going to be corrupt. So it's very hard to get anything done on the state level in Arizona. On the federal level, the problem has been is that so much of this is seen as victimless crime. It's not that people don't agree it's criminal, but you know, I talked about this earlier today with somebody, that one of the problems you have, like in Arizona, is that there's nothing flashy here. You know, when you can show a pile of fentanyl, that's flashy. When you can show dead kids from fentanyl overdoses, that's flashy. Trying to show somebody a fake mortgage situation, you know, money laundering through falsified mortgages, through falsified property sales. Where's the victim standing behind you? So you're at the podium saying, "Oh, well,
okay, this happens in court all the time. This happens with judges and clerks all the time."
Right. It's not flashy.
So it's the citizens of the country. Actually, every time you go into court, this is happening.
It's very tough when you don't have something flashy, when you can't point to specific victims, you can't show somebody with a leg torn off, literally. It's no longer a soundbite. And in a world where we have so much that's political, this has become a big problem. Because
so then the fact that this is happening so openly with Trump is actually a good thing because it's teaching that it's flashy.
Oh, no. Well, one of the things that I've said, and I've written about this in some of my recent writings, is that, you know, I have faced at the micro level, essentially, what Trump has faced at the macro level. I've had, you know, I've had my credit go on a Monday at 750 to 540 because overnight somebody put something fake on my credit. I've had that happen 5 different times. I've had charges filed against me in jurisdictions that have no jurisdiction to make the charge. They don't care. I've had
so what happens when they don't care? Because this sounds like my story to a degree. I mean, it's similar.
Lawfare is something that's really become, I think, much more available to the public, you know, to witness because of what's happened with Trump. But it happens every single day to individuals who get in the way of this. And one of the things we found in Arizona, for example, is that anytime, it wasn't necessarily a whistleblower, but anytime anyone came into the state of Arizona or lived in the state of Arizona and was the victim or figured out that crimes were going on, the swatting that went on, the swatting, you know, that would go on to them, their family members, their bank accounts, their lives, etc. You know, I had 6 attempts made on my life. I've had to take all sorts of steps to deal with that. I almost had a client killed because the client was mistaken for me. You know, there's things that, you know, you have to do.
Okay, so how do we deal with this? Because we know we're going into corrupt systems right now. We know how they're doing it. We know they're doing it through annuities, through fake stock things, you know, through fake mortgages. We know this is happening. We know that they're corrupting our judges this way.
One thing, and not to be somewhat flippant about it, one thing is I wrote a book. You know, I didn't just write a book. I wrote a 630-page monstrosity that, you know, works great as a doorstop. Yeah, it works great as a doorstop. So that people can not only, and it's important this way too, because a lot of people go on shows, they say, "Oh, there's the corruption," and they're right. They're absolutely right. But they say there's corruption and this is how it works, on. Okay. So when you want to you say, all right, that makes sense. I said, all right, that's fine. I'm doing that. That's all great. But this requires a writing, as painful as that is. This requires a writing.
I think that your work is well
So one of the things that we try to do, of course, is not just write a book about all this, a big book about all this, but also, as we've done with the footnotes, you know, we've provided about 5,000 or so pages of documents that take you through the investigation, including our forensic reports, so that people aren't just going to say, "Oh, that's really interesting, and I always knew that was going on." they can, if they want to, like this particular state senator is doing, they can, I don't recommend it, but they can go line by line by line, footnote by footnote by footnote, and see every attribution to every factual statement we
Okay,
make.
so we can understand the process, and I'm really glad that you've done that,
Which is
because this is
which by the way,
important.
but I don't want to minimize that for a minute. Not so much what I wrote per se, but I don't want to minimize that for a moment. You know, given, you know, one of the things, like where Carrie Lake, for example, I think has constantly gotten herself in trouble, is she has, in Arizona, she has used entirely almost every line that I've said. Here's the problem we have, and this is the problem I have, and this is the problem I have. And then when you try to corner her and ask questions about it, because she didn't write the book, she didn't memorize it, you know, it just becomes these, you know, they're just essentially statements. They're essentially, you know, bullet points. They're campaign ad statements, and they don't come with the substance.
Back to my question.
So one of the
how
problems,
do we take action
well,
that will solve the problem?
Okay. So
Problem,
like
solution, action.
Okay. So one of the things I say in the last chapter of my book is I talk about this, and I say, look, what state you're in matters to this, because you have different things available. One of the things that you have, I was talking to somebody who's from Ohio today, who has certainly problems with fraudulent mortgages in Ohio. It's a big area of fraudulent mortgage. What I said was, I said, look, if you can't get through to representatives, or if you think your representatives are corrupt, some are, some aren't, but if you can't get things passed that way, you've got the referendum system. You can put propositions on ballots. You can do that. The changes that you need are not all that great, and they tend to be fairly logical, and so it's very hard to put on ads against them. You know, but you've got to be very targeted in what you do. You got to make sure you're identifying exactly what the problem is. Realize that no one bill, referendum, et cetera, is going to solve every problem, but stick to specific problem solving. That's one of the things that doesn't happen. So we sit there and we wail on, oh, the system is corrupt, which is a term of art that has no meaning.
I'm detail oriented. I put everything in my lawsuits. Nothing happens because it's a corrupt system and they're just bought off, and it's not going to happen. Period. I get judges. There's no way I'm going to get a clean judge. Okay. And if so, they remove them from my cases. So we're not talking in this, let's say you have someone.
Well, so like I said, well, it's like what I said to you earlier. I said, if the problem is corrupt judges, stop spending the effort. You know, you can tell the FBI, you can hope they come in, but stop trying to go after the judge. Go after the process that gets the judge on there.
Actually, not even going after the judge, but sometimes you have to go before a judge, and you don't get to choose the judge. You file an election fraud case.
Like I said, there are some areas here where you're not going to be able to solve the problem. I mean, look, Carrie Lake was certainly not a nobody, and certainly didn't come in with no money. And yet every judge that she got, I mean, one of the things that happened, for example, in 22, when she lost, or allegedly lost, her team called me kind of out of the blue and said, what do you got here? What do you got going on? So I told them what we had going on. We discussed it. And so one of the things that happened is that as judges were assigned to her cases, I would get a call saying, what do you think of this judge? And almost invariably and fairly obviously, I would say, get rid of that judge. And they say, well, is the judge corrupt? I said, let's forget what the term is, whether they're taking bribes or not. I'm looking at this. You don't want this judge. Too many issues, too many problems. Get rid of this judge. Now, in how many, I think of 6 cases that she filed, on how many occasions did she actually follow the advice and get rid of the judge? 0.
And well, I don't think you get to pick a judge, so that can be a difficult kind of thing to do.
You always do, but at least you'll start off with the obvious. If you look up the judge and the judge has issues, like we look at certain specific things. We don't look at the case history of the judge. We look at certain private things with the judge. We look at the judge's deeds. We look at the judge's financials. We look at where the judge came from. We look at how he got appointed. I mean, there's a number of things we look at criteria-wise. We can tell in about 5 minutes if the judge is corrupt, but we will go into certain things to just kind of confirm this before we say this is the problem. Now, she's not going to go into court and say, you judge, you get off my case, you're corrupt. Not going to happen. But at least you can paper judges who you know to be corrupt. And you at least get an automatic in almost every state. You get the first one automatic. The first get rid of a judge is free. You just file a paper that says, I think the judge is biased, and that's the end of it. I
have to tell you, my judges don't get off my cases, no matter what.
Well, I don't know what the laws in Florida are. I can tell you that the laws in Arizona and
Texas, they have to get off the case. They just refuse to.
No. They have to. In California, for example.
It's the law in Florida. They have to, but they don't. I mean, it just... That's
Well,
the whole
but if
thrust issue.
if that's the case, then you're talking about doing something different, which is going to federal court on a 42 U.S.C. 1983 case, and you're
Right.
asking for the court to order the person off on the grounds that your civil rights are being violated. But if a judge literally is taking a law, like for example, in California we have 170.6, which says that within 10 days of a judge being assigned to my case, I can file, and it's already a pre-formed document that says, hi, my judge is so-and-so, I want him off my case under this code section. Automatically, they are off. They can't do anything else. They can't make decisions. They can't do anything. They are off. There's no such thing as rejecting it. Unless you've already done one before, or unless you don't meet the 10 days, there are no requirements other than I don't want this judge. They have to be off, period. If a judge said to me, sorry, I don't, well, firstly, wouldn't matter, because when I filed the 170.6, a copy of it goes to the presiding judge. So the presiding judge is automatically changing that judge. There's no hearing on this. It's an automatic. Now, if for some reason both the presiding judge and the trial judge said, well, yeah, you did it within the 10 days, and this was your first challenge, we don't give a shit, we're not following the law. Well, then they'd be putting that on, again, I'd be having a hearing, and I'd be saying to them, then you're not following the law. Now, what are they going to say to me? No, we are, but that's not what the law says. Fine.
I say that 15, in court, it doesn't matter.
50, I am telling you in advance, I've got 15 avenues in California to get them off, and they would be off my case within 24 hours, or they'd wind up in federal court. It wouldn't happen. I'm just telling you in advance, California doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. In Arizona, for example, it doesn't happen.
Florida.
If it happens in Florida, then take a class action, 42 U.S.C. 1983 case to the federal court, file it under a class action, and get the court system sanctioned for doing it. It's not a close call.
So you have to pick your battles.
Well, if you're not able to get, look, there's a difference between actually filing a motion that says this judge is biased, here's what this judge has done, on and on. Like I said, in most states you get a get out of that judge free card. So all you do is you say, pursuant to 170.6, I don't believe I can get a fair hearing before this judge. Please do the judge. Okay. It's automatic. There's no
Florida statute 3810, and it's based on fear that you won't have a fair trial before the judge, and it doesn't matter whether or not the judge agrees with you. You state it. You have a
if they're not doing it, if they're not, I'm about to file several, probably 2, maybe 3, 42 U.S.C. 1983 cases in federal court in Arizona, specifically calling this out. For example, in Mesa and in Gilbert, where I have the biggest legal issues going on with me personally because of what happened with me, they decided to adjudicate cases that they were not allowed under Arizona law to adjudicate. They were not allowed. There's actually specific provisions that say the city courts cannot adjudicate these cases. Actually, it says it right in the statute. They cannot do it. They have to send it up to Superior Court. They refuse to do it. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I file. It doesn't matter what I say. They simply refuse to do it. Well, those cases are going to wind up before the federal court. They're going to wind up in a class action. Anybody who's ever been fined, ever had an issue, ever been convicted, et cetera, I'm going to move to have the conviction set aside and vacated, and all the fines returned and damages paid to every one of the defendants. And we will go for, whatever the multi-millions of dollars is that these two cities have collected by violating the law. That's a great way to do it, because it's not like a close call thing. They clearly violated the law. They don't care. And when you have that going to the federal court under 1983, under Civil Rights Act violations, is great. All you have to do is claim that there was a due process violation. The due process violation is the civil rights violation, and it's a winner. It's a hands down winner.
Okay, and when you I want to hear this on the other side.
Not just for yourself, but you do it as a class action on behalf of every, like, for example, in this particular case, this would have led to a lot of fines of individuals who should never have been fined, who should never have had their case tried in a city court. So all those fines come back. You want to scare the crap out of Mesa and Gilbert? Tell them that they're going to be paying back 10, 20, 30, $40 million over the past 10 years of fines that they collected. That'll scare the crap out of them.
That they don't have. I mean, that's how you have to do it. Now, look, I once said to the Arizona bar about this back in 2021. I said, I know you guys, I'm not your favorite person this week because of all the people I'm turning in. I said, but what would you do if it wasn't me? I said, how many individuals do you think have been screwed by this process? How many individuals? Thousands
have been screwed by this whole process who don't know to do what I know to do. I said, I know who to sue. I know how to go after them. I know how to file a report with the bar. I said, but most people don't. This is the whole thing with the judgment fraud stuff. Most people will look at a lawyer, what looks like a lawyer letter on a lawyer letterhead. They'll think for sure the lawyer obviously is the one who sent it. As you know, if you ever try to call a collection firm, you can never get the lawyer on the phone. So, if you ever tried to call, you'd get, kind of a robo bank of people, falsely answering the phones. And ultimately, you've got a choice. You pay $10,000 to clear this judgment. That's actually happened to me. There's actually a bigger story, and it's in the book, but it's actually happened to me where one of the things that Brittany did 3 years before we ever met was she created a fake judgment in the state of California. And it was on me. It was meant to, from something that never existed. It was meant to disrupt an investigation I was working on, which it did to a point, but it actually really didn't in the long run. And, years later, this thing got brought to Arizona. It got argued both in Arizona and California. It ultimately got thrown out because it was totally, completely fraudulent. The judge who allegedly signed the judgment came back and said, I didn't sign this. I never had this case. This is a total fraud. But for most people, you get a $3,000 or $4,000 judgment, and maybe there's interest accruing, and your tendency is try to make a deal and pay it. All right, I'll pay you $2,000. I'll pay you $3,000. It's not to spend $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. I mean, the number, if you put it, forgetting what I charge as an hourly for a moment, but just a standard hourly fee for a lawyer, if you took the number of hours I spent arguing this case and defending this case and actually taking it up once on an appeal even, I'd be making $1 an hour, maybe if I was lucky. So even for lawyers, it's not profitable. It's a lot easier. I actually had a client in this when this judgment with interest was a $5,000 judgment with interest. Somebody created this into a $12,000 judgment. I had a client who came to me and said, let me call the lawyer. I don't care if it's fake or not. I will pay it for you because I need you for a certain amount of work over the next 2 months, where I'm going to be paying you an absolute fortune to save me and make me an absolute fortune. And that's a better deal for me to pay this dumb thing and not have you have to waste your time with it. By the way, we actually tried that. It didn't get accepted. They wanted on their $12,000 judgment, they wanted $25,000. So it was a scam on every level. And then ultimately I had it all thrown out. But I mean, I actually had a client in other cases. I had, when I had the arrest, the false arrest in Mesa, I had a client come in and pay the bail, pay literally a $100,000 cash bond, cash only bond, knowing full well that I was never going to show up in Mesa for anything because the amount of money I was saving them in the work I was doing for them was in the multi-millions of dollars. They weren't. It's not like they wanted to lose $100,000, but they were fine losing the $100,000 if necessary because they were saving several million with me on the work I was doing.
Part of doing business.
Yeah. So and with companies that I represent when we do this kind of stuff, which was the case here, where there are several companies that hired me to look at certain aspects of this. They did that. Part of the deal I have with them, bars don't like this, but part of the deal I have with them is that if this gets out of hand, they foot the bill for it, because the amount of money I'm likely going to save them is in the millions of dollars. So they'll put it up, they'll pay it.
So what other allies do you have in other states, and what does that look like to clean this up or make a change?
What's interesting is that Arizona, there's a story I tell about this in the book, but I think it's kind of important here. In Arizona, when we started the investigation work, I talked to one of the accountants who had done some of the forensic investigation work for the state of Arizona back in 2008, 2009. And she said to me, if you're expecting anybody in Arizona to do anything for you, you're nuts. You're never going to get anyone in Arizona to do anything. It doesn't matter how right you are. It doesn't matter what you prove. It doesn't matter what evidence you have. Arizona is a lost cause. You aren't going to get anything done. So, we've tried to bypass Arizona essentially by dealing with the attorneys general in the surrounding states and in several other states, and also the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ones who have prosecuted some of these cases. So, like, for example, we talk about in the book the mortgage fraud thing actually originating in Illinois in the 1980s with cocaine money. The idea of buying and selling properties and creating fake mortgages actually is a throwback to originally to the the early to mid 1980s when cocaine became big and billions of dollars needed to be laundered. And so a lot of the monies were put into properties in Indiana, in Illinois, in Iowa, what I call the 3 I's, which is where a lot of this originated. Then it kind of came to Arizona because the people who were doing this, the people who were doing this, actually, had houses in Arizona, had their summer, had their winter home in Arizona. So a lot of the money coming through, the 3 I states started filtering down into Arizona, and that's how Arizona got to be the capital of this. It wasn't originally. So you have some interesting things like that went on. You have U.S. attorneys in Cook County, Illinois, and in Polk County, Iowa, which is Des Moines, who have prosecuted these cases, who have, with the help of the DEA, have put drug dealers in jail, but not just drug dealers, have put the real estate agents, have put the escrow companies, have put the phony mortgage companies out of business, arrested convicted people, and taken them out of the game. So what we do to kind of get around this is we don't go where, we don't bang our heads against the wall, where we can't make a difference, where we can't affect a change. What we do instead is we go to states where we can. We go to U.S. attorneys who have actually charged and convicted people on these things, and we get them to kind of come back on it. So what we do is we try to get those states involved to come back on all of it.
Do you believe that you can make a difference in Florida?
Florida is interesting. I don't know. One of the reasons is that a lot, you have 2 issues in Florida, 2 big issues. One is the amount of the drugs and drug money that comes through Florida is absolutely huge, for obvious reasons. It's absolutely huge. So that's a problem. The second problem is new housing starts and new housing development. A lot of the cash, that runs through drugs runs through developers who are developing new housing. And because Florida has this absolutely humongous housing boom,
and they bring in illegals to build those homes.
And they bring in,
none of the money goes, stays here.
They bring in illegals to own the homes.
Yes.
I mean, so you've got a coordinated set of problems. Yeah.
And
in Illinois,
that creates a different economy,
right,
that doesn't even touch the Floridians, the state, or the country. It is just kind of like an absolute invasion.
Right. And that's one of the problems that Florida has. It's kind of the problem that Arizona has, being a border state to begin with. One of the problems Arizona has. Look, busting a bunch of real estate agents who are buying homes for drug dealers and drug suppliers, et cetera, in Des Moines, Iowa, is a much easier deal because it's a very straightforward process. We make the money in Chicago. We take the drug money. We hand it into escrows in Iowa. The brokers go out and buy the homes for us, knowing full well what they're doing. We own the homes for 2 years. We sell the homes. I mean, it's very straightforward stuff. And being able to bust it is, obviously a pretty straightforward deal. But economies like Florida, and especially with what goes on there and what goes on in Arizona, make it very, very, very difficult. Even in Texas, where they actually care about this and care about illegals, care about the fraud, et cetera, it's hard because you've got such a huge freaking state. And you've got, although you've got some big cities, you've got so many smaller areas that, that have their own, localized police forces, localized sheriffs, et cetera. It is very, very, very difficult. So even when you want to cover it, it's not possible. Can we do things in Florida? The answer is yes, for sure. But you got to start at the AG level. And I think, the one advantage.
And what do you think of AG Moody, Ashley Moody?
I've heard both good and bad things. I haven't ever worked with the AG's office in Florida. Actually, I have years ago, but I haven't more in modern day work with the AG's office. So I don't know how receptive they are. I know obviously Texas has been very receptive to everything we've provided. New Mexico, I've said, has been receptive. Even Colorado, which is kind of, this left-leaning place now, has been fairly receptive. California is very receptive. California is a matter of resources more than Florida, it is of the problem. But in Florida, I think it's a difficult question.
So I have repeatedly gone to state prosecutors in different counties on different issues that dealt with their county, and they have refused. They said, we don't deal with it. Now, first I've gone to the police or I've gone to the deputies, and it can be on something like election fraud. And I've shown them, okay, this is what's happening in your city, or this is what's happening within your county. And when they refuse to do it, I have at times gone then to the prosecutors to have them deal with it directly. And they still refuse to. Now, they have their own set of investigators and they can look into this, but they make the choice not to.
Right.
Where do we go with that? Ashley Moody is, their head guy.
Well, like I said, if you're dealing, for example, depends on what the problem is, but if you're dealing with anything that can be handled at the, one area, for example, we go into is we'll go to the IRS. One of the most fun agencies to deal with and go to is the IRS, because they don't care about anything. There are political things that have come out of the IRS. We all know what they are. But on the investigative level, they don't care less. If they think there's millions of dollars to collect in unpaid taxes, they'll investigate a paper bag. They don't care. So, like I said, you have to look for some creative alternatives. So
okay, let's stop here. Let me ask you specifically about this. Alachua County Supervisor of Elections, Kim Barton. She is fabulous. If you look at her Form 6, she has so much cash. She can't do anything. She's got like $265,000 cash just sitting there in her bank account. She's got so much. She so much stuff going on. She doesn't know how to hide it. She didn't take the how to hide your money laundering stuff 101 at all. So you're saying just give this to the IRS and say, hey,
no, it's not as simple as that. It's far more complicated, and the processes are far more complicated, and the average person is not going to figure this out in a million years, and I don't expect them to. But what I am saying is that what we do, for example, is that if we can't get through, to a state agency, if the AG's office isn't going to do it, if the governor is in the tank, so on and so forth. If we're not going to get anywhere through the state processes, then the way we do it is we look to the federal agencies. And like I said, most people obviously know the Justice Department, they know the FBI, but they don't know about all the other departments and all the other agencies. So what we try to do is find other agencies. Like, for example, with Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, you've got other agencies involved here. You have other agencies that investigate mortgage fraud. And so you go to them. When we talk about Medicaid fraud, we go to Health and Human Services. They've got investigators that deal with this. So you try to go to federal agencies that are, somewhat off the beaten track. When you're talking about falsified IDs, you go to the Federal Trade Commission of all places, but you go to the FTC. They've got investigators for that. Bankruptcy fraud. For bankruptcy fraud, for example, there actually is an Office of Bankruptcy Fraud Investigator, actually, by the way, located in Florida. The main, for the entire country, the main investigative body for bankruptcy fraud is located in Florida.
I'm guessing that when the U.S. corporation was bankrupt, what was that, in 2021? It went through that court here in Florida.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got the head investigative office, but there is an actual investigative office for bankruptcy fraud. Who knew? So rather than go to the Justice Department or even the FBI on that, we go directly to the bankruptcy fraud officer. There's actually a judge appointed to that office who oversees that office, and all they do is investigate fraudulent bankruptcy cases. Well, we've got 50,000 of them. So we go there. So we try to get creative about this. There are a lot of investigative bodies. They all, because of the way the rules work, what happens is that if any one of those investigative bodies takes on an investigation, it automatically gets reported back to justice, who then is required, and oftentimes does, filter out other parts of it. So if we go to the IRS on something and we say, these people are tax evading, the IRS obviously wants to get their money from the tax evasion part. But if the tax evasion is working through falsified mortgages, especially if they're Fannie and Freddie bought mortgages, great, because that's then going to go to that department. The Justice Department is going to send it to that place. If it also touches and concerns, human trafficking, it's going to go somewhere else, on and on and on. So one report made to one federal agency that handles that specific issue can take an entire set of issues to 4 or 5 different departments and then coordinate an FBI and Justice Department investigation. So, the idea that you have to go to the FBI, you call the FBI and you say, I've got a case. They don't care. They couldn't care less. You can walk into their offices. I could hand them a book. They don't care. The difference is, but like I said, one of the things that we have found with the book, and it's not the main reason for writing it, by the way, but one of the main things that's come with the book is that it's a calling card. It's a business card. I can go to the FBI and say, you don't have to sit here and talk to me for 2 hours. Here's the book. And the pages have been marked for you that are specific to the issue I'm bringing to you, but here's the book. I can go to an AG's office and say, like, for example, we've done this in New Mexico, where I've gone to the AG's office. We went there, we've gone there on a number of things, but one of them was bankruptcy fraud. We had 14 bankruptcies that were filed. Sounds like a small number, but the amount of dollars involved were big. We had 14 bankruptcies that were filed. We checked the addresses for the bankrupt party. 12 of the 14 addresses didn't exist. So welcome to bankruptcy fraud. The signatures on the bankruptcy documents, we could identify the forger on the bankruptcy documents filed with the federal court. So now you have about 15 different crimes that were committed. Okay? And there's a whole assortment of crimes in there, not just bankruptcy fraud. But we can take that, we can go to the AG's office, we can say, here's the issue of the day. It's on such and such pages in the book. It's on such and such footnotes. Here's what we're doing. Here's what you're going to be looking at. Here's our set of addresses, all that. It's all there. So it makes it a lot easier for us, and it provides a great deal more credibility, you might say, than if I just kind of blindly knocked on the door. I mean, post-COVID, it's a little hard. But if I went over to the FBI, went over to the window, tapped on the window and said, okay, I've got a story for you. 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours later, they're going, wow, this guy has a lot of info, but is it getting me anywhere? Probably not. Now I can target what I want to tell people. I can point out the sections in the book that apply specifically to the issue I'm talking about, give them the book, say, here's what you're looking at. Here's the evidence. If you want more evidence, call me. And then almost always now, invariably, I get a follow-up phone call.
So your book can be used as a tool.
Yeah, and that's why I say the writing itself, forgetting whether it's a good book or a bad book or an in-between book, or you like the way it's written, putting it down in writing and doing it in kind of a somewhat sequential chronological order, in terms of the investigation, having the overview parts, having the conclusion parts with all the data, being able to provide now by website 5,000 pages of footnote material, makes it so that it creates a credibility that might not otherwise be there if I was simply telling the story. Because I can say, well, you want to see evidence? Go to page 225. There it is. You want to see falsified documents? Go to this page. You want to see the forensic QDE report matching the signatures? Go to footnote 57. You can do that, and it's all there. And when you're making presentations, trying to put this into, I mean, when we first made the first presentation of this to the FBI, trying to do anything that even remotely looked like a PowerPoint, trying to explain all this, was absolutely crazy and way overwhelming. And so it's not so much that they don't believe it. It's just, it's too much information too quickly for anybody in the room to absorb. Now we can target, we say, okay, we're going to have a meeting about this issue. Let's talk about this issue. So we talk about Medicaid fraud, an easy one. Okay, let's show you the documents. We can pass around the documents. We can show them on the board. We can show them on the overhead. We can show them on PowerPoint. And we can point to things we can show. We can also then give them, a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation that they can then watch on their own, that has the narrative, has the material, et cetera. So we can do a lot of things like this that grab their interest, grab the credibility, and it's evidence they can see in 10 seconds or less. Oh, well, of course that's a fraud. Look at that document. Look at the way that is. Look at it. Oh, of course that's fraud.
So I'm interested in exposing clerks, JAs, and judges who are on the take. And my understanding from a recent interview that you did is that what happens is, like, let's say a judge does the mortgage fraud, okay? Then that's kind of like the equivalent of selling your soul and being enslaved to whoever you just did the mortgage fraud with, because it's not a particular case, if I'm not mistaken, it ends up being every case that they want you to intervene on, which just makes you their puppet or their absolute slave, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm interested here in the state of Florida in finding out who is taking what bribes, as far as the JAs, the clerks, and the judges. It sounds like you have a pattern for it. It doesn't sound like it should be a big deal. I understand it's a colossal deal, but to me, if something's possible, then you can do it. So the question is, how do you then go in? I want to get this done. How do I get those records on which judges, which JAs, and which clerks are corrupt. I want that document. I want that report.
Well, so one of the things we did is when we looked at Maricopa County judges, one of the things that we did is we went to their deeds. First thing we did, I mean, just take the easy way to do this. We knew that judges were being bribed through mortgage fraud, through deed fraud, through properties they were getting. So we immediately went and looked at that. So we pulled, there's 100, give or take, as it changes obviously day to day with retirements, et cetera. But there's about 120 judges in the Maricopa County system. So what we did is we literally had a team go through the deed records for Maricopa County and pull deeds, certainly we pulled, usually one from say 10 years ago, one from recent, but certainly tried to tie it to when they became a judge or shortly before they became a judge and pulled out those deeds. Now, gets a little complicated, but I'll try to explain what we did here. So the first thing we looked at was the signatures on the deeds. In cases like, I'll give you an example, that like you asked about officials. We had one official who was a lawyer for the city of Phoenix. And what we did for this person is we knew for a number of reasons that this person almost assuredly was on the take. So first thing we did is we looked at their deeds. This person was married, husband and wife. This is the husband. What we did is we looked at their deeds. And one of the things that we found on their deeds was over about 10 years, there were 4 sets of deeds. So they bought and sold several times or refinanced, I think, one of those. One of the first problems that we had was that the signatures of both husband and wife on 3 of the 4 deeds didn't match. So you're looking at signatures that are not the same signature. Whoever signed that wasn't that person, because that person being in the position of power that they were, we knew their signature. These signatures weren't close, not for him, not for the wife. So one of the things you have first is you have deeds, regardless of what the deeds say, you've got deeds on them where the signatures do not match at all. So clearly that's a problem. Somebody else signed that document.
If they're the one on the take and they're the one doing the embezzling or the money laundering, so why aren't they just signing their own document?
Well, I think you'd have to ask them, but I suspect that the reason is because some people get panicky and don't want to put their name on the document. They want some kind of deniability. Okay. I assume there's other reasons, but I assume deniability was the main one. Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I don't know about that document. I didn't know that existed. And so, you see these things where clearly the signatures don't match. Okay. Second thing we looked at is the notarizations, where on all 4 of the documents, we could actually identify the forger notarer, notary public on there and say, this is the person who notarized each one of these documents.
Like such as if it were Brittany.
Right. So in a lot of cases, we call them Brittany deeds or Brittany documents, where she's great at this. And we can tell, one, because, there's a lot of changing a signature. There's a lot of trying to, to defraud on the document, obviously. So she's not writing her name the same way. But we have a wonderful handwriting expert who deals with that and works through that. So one of the things that we have on there is we have that. So we look at this. So 2 things we have already. We have signatures that don't match at all. They don't even come close. And we have notarizations on the documents. Now, if people want to see this, on reporttothegovernor.com, in the investigation section, they can actually go there. We have a video presentation called What is a Brittany Deed, where we actually have this with narration so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So if you have a question about it, you can go and see exactly what documents I'm talking about, exactly what doesn't match. It's fairly obvious stuff. We wanted to pick stuff that was, that you can obviously visually see. So you start with that, okay? And so that tells you a whole lot right there. Now, it doesn't tell you necessarily how much the bribe was or what they were bribed into doing, but you already start with the fact that you've got documents that are falsified. You've got a public official with falsified documents. That's a great starting point. So we did similar things, of course, for the judges, and what we found was similar problems.
Okay, so
let me ask you this: on the deeds, the multiple deeds, is the value of the property static or is it dynamic? Does it change?
It's not that it changes or is dynamic. It's kind of not either. It's that one, you have somebody buying and selling in there, selling one house and buying another house in there, and you have refinance.
Okay.
So you have refinance in there as well. So, we could now the question you asked is a very good one. So one of the things that we would do is, especially with refinance, okay, which is obviously different. If it's one thing if I want to buy another home and somebody gives me, a break on a mortgage or a fake mortgage ever to buy a home. But what if I like my home? I mean, what if I'm in a very nice home and I don't have any intention of selling it or moving somewhere? I don't want to do that. So we look at the refis, and one of the things that we look at, there's two issues here. One of the issues we look at on refis is we look at the timing. We have charts, and anybody can get them, of when, rates go up and down and up and down. Did it make any sense to refi at this particular time? And so, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But obviously, if it's at a time where it doesn't, where rates have peaked, and remember, when we're talking about this, people think that, a rate is kind of like this, and then the Federal Reserve raises rates, so it goes like this, and instead, it doesn't. Every single day, rates change. Okay. If they changed by, an eighth of a point, that's not a thing. But if they've changed over, say, a month or two, going up, say, more than a half a point or a full point, or going down a point, obviously people are trying to time it to when they go down. So when you see deeds that are refied at a higher point, at a point where nobody would actually do the refi, it doesn't make any sense. Again, it's a red flag. It's one of the many red flags. But the other thing that we do, and it's one of the things that we did on a number of the officials, including Katie Hobbs herself, the governor of Arizona, is we then went to the Arizona Corporation Commission filings of the mortgage company. So if there were a trust deed, which means there's a mortgage, we would go and look at the mortgages and look at the mortgage company. And what we would find oftentimes is that although the company itself is an actual, well, not always. Sometimes we found that the company didn't exist. It existed on paper in Arizona. For example, let me kind of explain how this works. If I file a corporation, I file a Delaware corporation. People used to say, I've got a Delaware corporation. Okay, that's great. But if the Delaware corporation wants to operate in Arizona, it needs to file a foreign corporation document with the Arizona Corporations Commission saying, we're going to operate in the state of Arizona, whatever business we're doing. It doesn't matter, we could be selling widgets, but we're going to operate in Arizona. Now, works this way on every state. Any state that you operate in, you file with the state, either the Corporation Commission or Secretary of State's office, whichever is designated, a document that says, I'm going to work in that state. That's how this works, okay? So what we found was two things. We found that corporations or LLCs were being set up in Arizona as essentially mortgage companies, mortgage lender companies, where the mortgage lender was a falsified company, where the documents, we could identify who formed the company, we could identify who was doing the yearly upgrades, et cetera, et cetera. We could identify the handwriting as being part of the Chavez crime family. The other thing we could find also was that where, say, a Delaware corporation was coming into Arizona, all the paperwork looked legitimate because it all gets filed. Your Delaware certificate of good standing and your initial articles of incorporation all look good, but were forgeries, where the state of Delaware never had that corporation or LLC ever registered in that state. So the documents that were filed with the ACC, the Arizona Corporations Commission, were all falsified documents. So we found that as well. And so that's another red flag. So we look at the mortgages that are being taken out. And if it's, Sierra Vista Mortgage Company, okay, who wrote up the documents in the state of Arizona for that company? Can we identify the forger? Can we identify them as being part of the Chavez crime family? If the company is an out-of-state company, which is filing to come into Arizona, we look at that filing in the other state. Did that company actually ever file in the other state? Is it a real company? And so those are the things. So when we find all of these things existing within one set of deed documents and obviously the mortgage companies, corporation filing documents, we got a winner. That's a fraud. So it's really that simple. So we have criteria that we can look at that actually takes us pretty extensively into the fraud. And then after a while, one of the things that we would find is that once we started figuring out how the mortgage company fraud part of it worked, we found we could then reverse this. So rather than finding a judge and looking at their documents, we would go into that company. So if the company was, Four Seasons Mortgage, simple name, Four Seasons Mortgage, we could pull the documents, we could cross-reference Four Seasons Mortgage documents in the recorder's office and look to see who they were funding and where those documents, where their names appeared, where they were funding loans, were those documents fraudulent and forged. So we can now do this in reverse. So we were finding in several cases, like Fairway Independent Mortgage was one of the companies we named. Fairway Independent Mortgage, we found to be a fraud. We could tell you who created it, how it was created, and that the mortgages were essentially bribe monies being passed back through the mortgage process. Because we could go and look to see every document they were filing, and every document that was recorded in their name. So we could do it from both ends.
Wow. You've talked a lot about mortgage, but your book, kidnapping, drug trafficking, human trafficking, creating title companies, escrow companies that are all fraudulent in this big elaborate scheme that, looks like it encompasses government organizations and non-government organizations that are working in concert across the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems. One of the problems is that, like I said, when you maybe the best way to put it is this. Look, you've got, and I think the book gives us number 2. We have roughly about $150 billion of known cash going through the United States every year for drugs. 150 billion. That may not seem that much in a scheme now where we have about $4 trillion of income, from taxes, from revenue coming into the country. But if you think about it, just 10 years ago, prior to COVID, we were running budgets that were anywhere from $1 to $2 trillion. 150 billion is a very large number. You're talking between 5 and 10% of your GDP is coming from drug monies. That's a lot of money coming through your system. That's a lot of money that can't just go into a bank, but must go through something else to be laundered. When you're taking, what is basically between 5 and 10%, 15% even of your GDP, and you're putting it through things such as properties. It's just, look, that's just buying gold bars for all it matters. But when you're doing it this way, that's a big deal. That's a very large percentage of your economy. In Arizona, the number is $15 billion. That's about a third of Arizona's entire budget. You've got a GDP coming through drug money that's probably between 20 and 25% of the GDP, meaning that, and this is the big deal, if you shut off the border tomorrow, which wouldn't shut off all drugs, but if you shut off the border tomorrow, you cut off all drug trafficking. Trump makes good on what he has suggested, and he bombs all the cartels. And we check all the ports, so nothing's coming in by ship from China. You're not getting heroin, you're not getting poppies, on and on. You do all that work and you cut out all the drugs. State of Arizona would be bankrupt. It would be not only in bankrupt, it would be in such deep bankruptcy. And just so you know, states can't technically file bankruptcy. There's no code for that. Only cities
Okay,
can.
so let's say that we did cut them off. Let's say that they were bankrupt, that they didn't have that money, that they got to start from scratch. Maybe they'd start with some small businesses that were local. I mean, I see a lot of positives in that. If the only way you're making your money is through drugs and corruption, it's okay to wipe you out and start over.
Here's the problem. And you're not the first to say that. And I think this is a debatable issue. And it's interesting. It's really literally a political science thesis on what would actually happen if you did this. Because the downside of it is, I mean, look, for sure the upsides. Kids aren't dying of fentanyl. Huge upside. Monies aren't going to gangs. You don't have the kind of gang activity that surrounds drugs. Huge upside, obviously. You don't have the crime that goes with it. Huge upside. I mean, look, the upsides are obvious and they're huge. Here's the downside. The people of Arizona the next day have no court system. They have no sewer system. They have no trash system.
It's just corrupt anyway, the court system. Who cares if you don't have it?
Well,
they still have a sewage system. It still works. And let your local guys who can't get jobs because of all the corruption stuff, all of a sudden they can get a job to fix the sewage system. I see no problem there.
No, because it wouldn't work that way. Because the amount of corruption you'd be shutting down in a day would literally close the court system. Okay, so that means anybody who's in an advantaged position can screw you over in a heartbeat, and you're never going to see a day in court, literally. I'll give you an example of where this actually happened.
I don't know if it makes any difference if those people are winning the cases through corruption anyway.
No.
Your day in court is
but that's not accurate or fair. Look, 99% of divorce cases, for example, that go through the system in Arizona good judge, bad judge, whatever, but are handled in a reasonably fair way. Okay, now all of a sudden you want to file for divorce from your spouse and you're waiting 4, 5, 6 years before your case can get heard. You got a child custody problem and you want to get a court date. You have no judges. You can't get a court date on a
thinking of civil court when you're talking about
let's go with
sewage
civil.
issues.
Let's go with civil.
Or
yeah. Let's go with civil. Let me give you an example of where this actually happened, so you get a sense of this, because this actually kind of happened once. In San Diego, in Southern California, in San Diego County, there was a period of time in the early 90s where the court system basically had almost no money to operate. It operated anyway, it did the best it could, but budget problems being what it was shortly after the first Gulf War, it had no money to operate. It was not getting any more money from the state. So what happened is that defense lawyers in criminal cases all had their clients, all of them got together, and all of their clients refused to waive their right to a speedy trial, meaning that everybody's criminal case had to go to trial as fast as possible, or the case had to be thrown out. So the only way to handle that, the only way they could do that without murderers literally being let go, without causing absolute chaos, was to literally shut down the civil court system for 2.5 years.
Well, no, this is criminal versus civil. Those are two different things. I said civil. You're
missing the point of what I'm saying.
Okay.
If you shut down anything that has a problem in a city system, you shut down if the criminal system is overloaded, the civil system gets killed, the family court system does, the probate system. You want to probate your parents' house because they both died? Forget it. The amount of chaos you can cause by shutting this down is absolutely huge. And so when I talk about the sewer system,
I'm not a lawyer.
Wait, hold on. I'm not talking about that you don't have a sewer, that your drain stops working. I'm talking about sewage treatment plant stop, garbage collection stop. I mean, you've seen what happens in New York City when you have a garbage strike. Imagine when you can't pay the garbage men. The amount of money that the state would all of a sudden, state, county, local government would not have would cause absolute chaos. And the amount of tax dollar you would need to charge each and every person, everybody of age in Arizona would be.
What are you basing this theory on?
Oh, it's happened in Illinois. For example, Illinois several years ago.
Hold on, you just said San Diego, so let's talk about that for a second.
When I'm talking about San Diego, what I'm saying is San Diego had this problem. San Diego had this problem. They literally had to shut down the civil court system for 2.5 years. So nobody with a family court issue, nobody with a lawsuit in a civil court issue, nobody with a probate issue, anything that was outside of criminal was literally shut down for 2.5 years. You had a trial scheduled for next month, no trial for 2.5 years. You filed a case, you took 6 to 7 years for your case to be heard.
So taxes are what runs the government entities. I understand that you're a lawyer, but I have to say
fines, fees, and taxes.
Right. But the problem is that you would lose revenue from the taxes, because the problem is, and I think this is what people don't understand, when you've got a third, 25% of your GDP is coming from drug money related transactions. In other words, a drug dealer is buying a car, a drug dealer is buying a house. Well, you can argue all you like. Like I said, I'm just telling you what would happen. What would happen is something akin to a disaster. Now, look,
I do not agree. I understand.
If you want to balance this out and you want to say, look, getting rid of the drugs, getting rid of the fentanyl deaths, getting rid of drug dealers, getting rid of organized crime, getting rid of the need, for why a lot of illegals cross the border, on and on and on and on. There are a lot of pluses. This is not without a whole assortment of pluses we just talked about. But people better understand what the negative is. And the reason why in states like Arizona, nothing changes is because nobody wants to make the announcement. Nobody wants to make the announcement to the people of Arizona that your taxes just increased, from your property taxes to your automobile tax to your sales tax, everything. You're going to have 5 times income, everything, 5 times.
I do want to say I don't necessarily agree with your premise and the outcome that you're reaching. I hear what you're saying. I do not believe that what you're saying is the only alternative. And also, you're a lawyer, and so you live kind of in that courtroom legal system. But there's a whole world out there of small businesses that exist or did exist and can exist that actually the economy is supposed to revolve around. And then you have people working in those places. And when you start bringing it back into the communities and give it back to the people and take it away from foreigners and drug dealers and criminals, then all of a sudden you have a whole new base of the economy, and it's back where it needs to be. And then your economy is much purer. And so our conversations are different.
It's not a matter of it being pure. I think again, you kind of missed the point here. It's not a matter of it being pure. It's a matter of, look, there are 1,000 different advantages that come with taking illegal money out of a system. There's no question about that. The question is what are the people of any particular state, including a state of like Arizona, which has become so horrifically corrupted over this? What's going to be the consequence to the people living in Arizona for at least a good 5 to 10 years? What I'm talking about is an outcome of 5 to 10 years if you're a citizen of the state of Arizona. What are you likely to
I do
see?
not believe
Now,
that
I'm not saying that
outcome.
at the end of the rain there isn't the rainbow. I think that you're
I'm not
right about
I
outcome.
am not
But what you're going
agreeing
to
with
see, but what
the
you're going
5
to
to
put
10
up with,
years.
but what you're going to put up with over a 5 to 10 year period is going to be something close to a disaster.
I
And you better
do
be
not
prepared
agree
for that.
with the demise theory.
Well, let me give you
all
another
on
way
it.
to look at it in Arizona. Let's just take Arizona. Let me give you another way to look at it in Arizona economically. Just another example of this, where this has happened in Arizona. When we had the Great Recession, we had the 2007, 8, 9 recession. One of the problems is that the amount of money coming into the state of Arizona obviously collapsed. We had a Great Recession. Cash wasn't flowing. Loans couldn't be obtained, et cetera, et cetera. Ask anybody who lived in the state from 2007 to 2015 what the differences were in 9, 10, 11, 12 in terms of services, in terms of availability, in terms of courts, in terms of number of judges, on and on and on, what things they had to put up with and what tax increases they got. And that was from a recession.
You're talking about
that's from a pullback. Wait,
economic
you brought this up.
structure.
That's from a pullback of only a few percentage points. We're talking about cutting out 25% of the state's economy. You think that's not a disaster? I would tell you to take Econ 101. That's an absolute disaster. Now, is that better at the end because you now have this pure system? You don't have this money in the system? Yeah, that's great. But you better be prepared if you live in the state of Arizona for a 5 to 10 year disaster, because that's what you're going to get.
I don't agree with you at all.
Well,
I don't.
all the data points to the contrary. You can disagree all you'd like, but I'm just telling you and telling the people of the state of Arizona, that's the problem you have, and it's really the reason why you don't have the people who get the fact that there's a problem, who are not involved with the corruption, fixing it, because this is the disaster they'd have to deal with. The businesses that are there would leave, which would then cause an even bigger problem. You think Intel, that has built a big presence there, Motorola, who has built a big presence there, you think the healthcare industry, which has built a big presence there, the insurance companies, the defense contractor.
Are you saying they built it on corruption?
No, I'm saying that if they can't get services, they won't expand there. So you have a circular problem. I'm just saying, you can disagree with my economics all you want.
Hang on. No.
You're dead wrong.
Yeah. Christine, you're dead wrong. If you take out a third of your budget for your company and expect it to continue increasing profits like it was before you took out a third, it's not going to happen.
We're not talking about profits. We're talking about the functionality of a city or a county.
What he just said, hang on. He just said taking out 1/3.
I want you to know that I'm almost out of time and I'm going to have to go in a minute. So when I cut off, it's not intentional. I would like to expand longer than I can, but keep going.
If you take out the budget, you're going to have less people working. So your services are going to decrease, whatever that looks like. If it's city garbage men, you're going to have 3
You're going to take out the fat.
Okay,
you're going to take out the fat, and Republicans have been saying for a long time, get rid of this fat in the government, and you take out 25%, and you're going to lose those people. Boom. And I'm not so sure that, since you're saying they're corrupt anyway, that's going to be a problem.
Who are you going to?
I'm telling you that the state of Arizona would collapse economically in an instant.
And I'm telling you, the
amount of time it would take to recover would be at least 5 to 10 years minimally. And that's if they still were able to retain the businesses, the large scale employers that are there, who decide not to move over the whole mess in the first place.
And I hope we get more mom and pops.
Yeah, you're just plain wrong. And
I am
dangerously
not
so.
wrong. I
Yeah,
am
you're
not wrong. We have
dangerously.
a different, no,
I'm sorry, Christine, but you're dangerously wrong. And what
no,
would
I
happen
think
to the
you
state
are.
would be absolutely
You are
horrific.
dangerously wrong on this.
Hang
You
on.
are
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
absolutely
whoa. Stop,
inaccurate in this.
I'm sorry.
We
We
have
actually,
it.
like
Hey,
I said, we have
agree to
economic
disagree.
examples of this all over the place.
yes.
Now, we have economic examples of this everywhere. We have them all over the world. We have them in the United States, where just small pullbacks, 5% pullbacks, have caused absolute chaos. There's a reason why Illinois, we don't talk about it much, but why Illinois is the #3 state of people leaving after California and New York. And it's because the state of Illinois went bankrupt and had to raise property taxes by 3 times just to pay a couple of percentage points. You're talking about something extensive. And I'm sorry, Christine, but in this, I'm sorry, you just don't know what you're talking about. That's not how economics works. What may come out of it in the end would be absolutely lovely and wonderful, and we may all sing Kumbaya and hold hands together. But what would happen in the interim is a disaster, and we've let it happen, especially in border states, California as well to a degree, but California's got other things that sustain it. Arizona does not. The only thing it's got going for it now is that it's managed to lure away businesses from California into it. And so it's got these employers with employees that are intending to expand. If you pull back on the economy by that and you remove the services that are necessary, every single service has to be cut back. And to the degree it would have to be cut back, the employers would leave. They would leave in a moment, and they certainly would not be expanding. And employees who were paying $1,000 annually in property taxes, who now had to pay $3,000, would be selling their homes and moving to Texas or Florida. That's how this works. It's always worked this way. And even if you like the end result, which I get, and I certainly agree with the result of it, the path to getting there would be horrific. Just think of what happened during the Great Recession. Think of all the jobs that were lost, the people who were unemployed. Just think of that. And that's a recession. This isn't anything like this. This is a massive depression in one particular state. And not only that, the ripple effects of that going on in Arizona would cover the bordering states, and it would cover any companies that have businesses outside of that. When you start losing employees at some of the major healthcare systems, insurance companies, defense contractors, that starts to have a trickle-down effect in other states as well. I'm not against the idea of doing this. I think that at some point you've got to get the drug money out of there. You've got to get the racketeering and corruption out of this state and out of the states where it's gone into. But you've got to be prepared for the consequences of what has happened over the years on relying on this money.
Right. And I agree with you 100%, even though Christine's not here to defend herself. So we're going to agree to disagree with Christine, because I wholeheartedly believe you. And all you have to do is look to Austin, Texas. All those.
Yeah, Austin's a great example, because Austin, has a very different philosophy. I have a good friend who lives in Austin. It has a very different philosophy than most of the other parts of the state of Texas. It is a woke area. It is a liberal-run city. And like what you see in other liberal-run cities, that's what you would see in the state as a state for the state of Arizona.
Exactly. And the companies that moved here and established headquarters in Austin to flee California and their high taxes, guess what? They're leaving Austin.
Yeah, they're wishing they hadn't come. It's not what they thought. When they thought about Austin, they thought it very. I love Austin. I've been there a number of times. I love it. I love the music scene. It's cosmopolitan. It's got a lot of great things to offer, et cetera, et cetera. It's a neat place to be.
Well, that's back in the 70s, 80s, 80s.
Well, what it's done to itself is I think incredible, and that they can't see this is even worse. But to me, it's like San Francisco. It's the same issue. Where San Francisco, when I was growing up, when I was in college, I had a lot of friends who I was in college with who were from the Bay Area. They won't go to the Bay Area to save their lives. Literally, they won't go there. They won't venture there. Their parents have all moved out of there. If they did live there for a while, they're so excited that they got out. Regardless of real estate prices, you can't walk down the street. I've had a number of friends with jobs, that had jobs in the city of San Francisco, who left and moved back down to Southern California because they couldn't walk the streets without the drugs, without the homeless, without being accosted, and now, of course, without the crime. That's what happens when you don't have the cash. You have bad policies, but you don't also have the cash to deal with the problem. And when California is running, billions of dollars, $25–30 billion of deficit, and has, an unfunded pension mandate coming up and other things, this is what happens. You don't have the cash. And ask anybody in California if they think they're undertaxed. And that's not the Arizona problem. Just ask them in California if they think they're undertaxed. When you look at how much tax dollars actually get paid by the average resident, as Arnold Schwarzenegger said, you flush your toilet, literally there's a tax. When you look at all the things, by the way, California, for example, to raise revenue to deal with this deficit problem, is actually proposing, it just got out of, I think, the California State Senate yesterday, is proposing putting a tax on travel, so that they're going to put a meter on your car and you're going to pay a mileage tax as part of road improvement. So you drive, say 10 miles back and forth to work, that's one amount. But if you drive 30 miles or 40 miles, that's another thing. And one of the problems, of course, is that to have affordable housing in San Diego or Los Angeles or San Francisco or even Sacramento, you're living suburban. You're living with an hour commute. You're living with a 50-mile commute. So now what's going to happen is all those people who try to escape the high cost are going to get now taxed for driving back and forth to their job.
Right.
It's incredible. As Christine probably would like to read my previous book, Before Report to the Governor, which is called The Decline and Fall of California and the Rise of Social Liberalism. And I wrote that book in 2007. And essentially what I said in that book was that you all have until roughly about 2027. You have about 20 years before California is going to be in total economic collapse. And I took every area from infrastructure to political system to the traffic problem to the environmental issues, on and on and on. It's about 150,000 words if anybody's interested. The Decline and Fall of California. And it discusses where all of these were heading. And what has happened? All of them have gotten there and have already surpassed what I projected was going to be the case.
Where's your book available and how much does it cost?
That book, I believe is about $20, $21. It's available on Amazon. I would suggest getting it from Amazon. They can do it. We don't generally carry a stack of them, unfortunately, but Amazon does. And so, that, like I said, that book was written in 2007, and it basically predicted how California economically was going to fall. And so it kind of gives you a history of California, roughly from about 1950 to the time I wrote the book. It tells you what went right, where it went wrong, how it went wrong, and what's going on as a result. And, every time I go back, because I'm from California, every time I go back, it is worse than the time I left it. It is not, and anybody who's left California now will tell you, it's not the place they grew up. It's not the place they went to school. It's not the neighborhoods they used to live in. Even my 23-year-old son, Matthew, who just graduated from Berkeley, says the same thing. He says, there's no way I would ever live here. Whatever I ultimately do, whatever job I ultimately get, whatever grad school program I get, it's not going to be in California. I can't be here.
That's
sad.
sad.
And coming from a kid who loves surfing, that's a real big deal.
That's very sad. It's a commentary on the United States of America and what we've allowed our country to. Oh man. Is there anything I can do to help you move this thing forward? You're more than welcome to come on my show anytime. Bring guests, evidence.
Well, one of the things that I've done and I found is really helpful is the topics are so broad and so big that it's hard to get into them as a general deal. It's great as a first time because people need to know what we're talking about. But some of the issues and some of the specifics, one of the questions I get asked a lot, which I did a little bit here. I know some of the people who have put in comments, I read the comments, I do see them and they do matter. Say, well, you're not letting someone else talk and you don't talk as much stuff. Part of the problem is that some of the comments I tend to get after shows is, could you explain more about this? Could you explain more about that? One of the big ones, of course, is how mortgage fraud works, how the money laundering works. One of the things that I don't talk about nearly enough is that as much as we talk about the mortgage scheme, because that's as huge as it is, we don't talk about the 10 other ways that monies are laundered in Arizona. Just to give people an example of how crazy this gets. There are trade schools in Arizona that say have 100 students, but instead put down on their rolls that they have 200 students. And at $20,000 a pop, you have 100 students where you launder through the student rolls an extra $20,000 per student. So an extra, extra couple of $1 million going through students who don't exist. So, there's a lot of interesting things that we have found in ways that monies are laundered that are outside the norm. And it's kind of fascinating to talk about just some of the ways that people have found to do this. Done it through construction companies that overinflate their bills. You bought, so many cubic yards of concrete. Nope, on your bill, you multiply that by 10 and you put cash through that. You said you needed roofing supplies to build 100 houses. It was this amount. Instead, you build it this amount and you put the cash through that bill. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways we do this, not just the mortgages, but it's stuff that doesn't get talked about that much because of what we concentrate on. So what I'd love to do with you is come back and talk about some of the specific areas that are in the book and kind of delve into those with a little more specificity so people can understand. And also, I encourage questions. I encourage comments. Some people love me. Some people may hate me. That's okay. Trust me, I get that on Twitter every day. It's not a new thing. But I encourage questions. If somebody thinks I'm wrong on something, I'm happy to then deal with it directly and answer that. If somebody wants to have a better explanation of something, or how did you come to this conclusion, or what evidence do you have of this, I'd talk about that as well. One of the things that, of course, is coming up and is a big deal is the election fraud. We have a lot of information and material on election fraud, especially from 2020, from the presidential election in Arizona. Well, of course, we just had the indictments this past week of Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman and Mark Meadows and others, on election interference in the state of Arizona. The Attorney General in Arizona, Chris Mays, had a copy of my book, had a copy of additional information, and concealed that information from the grand jury, information that would have shown to the grand jury that there were all sorts of issues and problems and fraud that occurred in the 2020 election, fraud that may have led to a different result of Trump actually being declared the winner in Arizona. He lost by 10,000 votes. We actually show information that would provide that he actually won. And we give you the analysis, we give you the documents. We actually even got a hold of the ballot signatures on the mail-in ballots. And we actually show you examples of mail-in ballot signature envelopes, the signatures, and how they do not in any way, shape, or form match what's on the official signature roll. Right. So we actually have the comparisons side by side, and we have it in the book as well. In the book, we show you actual documents from the recorder's office of here's the signature on the back of the ballot envelope, here's the official signature. These things are not even close calls. And what's worse than that is we can actually identify in about 10% of the cases, we can actually identify who the forger was.
Right.
And then as we were talking at the beginning today, we've been working on some stuff with Pinal County, which is right next door to Maricopa County, where we've taken people who are phantoms whose names appear on deeds for the purposes of money laundering, who are also registered to vote and actually have voted under this phantom name. Right. So yeah, we've dealt with that as well. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up, especially with whatever trial comes out of these people, in Arizona. But the evidence of the fraud in Arizona is absolutely clear. That does not mean that Trump won the election overall. It doesn't mean that other states have the same issues or are also defrauded. But certainly from what we investigated in the state of Arizona, there's no question about the problem. And it's something that we talk very detailed about in the book, both in terms of statistical data, in terms of actual documents. We even have a document from one investigator who actually watched ballots being created, watched them being driven to the ballot facility that counts them. Over 100,000 of those, along with cash being distributed for them. We actually have that signed, notarized declaration as part of the book, as one of the footnotes in the book. So there's a lot of different areas we cover and a lot of things to talk about here. So I'm happy to come back anytime and just kind of, I would say, pick one, and I'll be happy to try to see if we can stick to that topic.
Well, I'll tell you what, I need to order your book and read it, and that way we can go from there, break it down a little bit more. You probably don't know, but I am a multi-published litigator. I've litigated everywhere from Harris County all the way United States Supreme Court.
Well, by the way, just so you know, 2 weeks ago, we actually looked at Harris County and found a whole assortment of Brittany deeds in Harris County, which we were expecting to find. But your county is probably one of the more corrupt. Certainly Austin is, and it's not the only area. But Harris County is probably, which is Houston, Texas, as we talked about, is probably one of the more corrupt for the deed fraud. And one of the reasons they talked about before is because of the amount of new home construction that you've had in the greater Houston area over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. And it's still booming. They're,
Yeah.
you know, any nook and cranny in the city of Houston that they can build these 3 and 4-story townhouses that are sandwiched together.
Yeah, these row houses.
Room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everywhere. It's the house I live in now, John, is 2 miles from the house I grew up in. I moved here when I was 12 years old. I used to hunt where this house is that I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah.
And I've watched this completely change. It was a white middle class neighborhood. Now I'm in between the ghetto and the barrio in this nice little gated community of houses. It's crazy. So yeah, I've experienced it. And I'm very familiar with the RICO and what it takes to investigate a RICO and get substantial evidence, whatever that looks like, testimony or material. Kudos to you. Congratulations. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Your son.
Yes.
What's the status on that?
Well, we don't talk a lot about it for obvious reasons. For people who know the story and know about my book, they know that my youngest son, who is now 6 years old, was abducted 3.5 years ago as an extortion attempt to stop my office's investigation. He was taken literally with the proviso that if the investigation stopped, he would be returned. That happened 3 times. It wasn't just a single abduction. He was abducted 3 separate times and brought back when we did certain things to ensure his recovery. Finally, the 3rd time, and all of which were in violation of court orders, et cetera, he was finally abducted for a 3rd time and has not been returned to me since. We don't get information on where he is. Obviously, I don't get birthday cards or Father's Day cards or anything else. We have no communication whatsoever. And, all of the whole story behind that and how it happened and how it came about are all discussed in detail in report to the governor. It's not just important to me, but it's also an important aspect of the story and the lengths that, I understand, Christine's issues, but the lengths that people will go to cover up, especially in white collar crime, are extreme. One of the things, there's a judges college. Most people don't know this, but in Reno, Nevada, there's actually a judges college, and states send their newly appointed judges to this college to learn about how to control their courtrooms. Because the worst thing a judge can do is lose control of their courtroom. So they come to Judges College, they spend about a week there, they learn, it's great, and it works very well. One of the things they teach you in Judges College is that there are 2 areas where you can expect as a judge to potentially have violence or a violence problem. Not in regular criminal cases. Criminals have been in the system, they might act up, but the fact is criminals have been in the system, they know they get caught, they know they go to jail, it's part of the process. White collar criminal is something different. You take the average person, middle class, upper middle class, who has never been to prison, never thought about going to prison, never saw themselves in any way as being a part of the system, and you tell them that they're going to serve 10 to 15 years in prison, and you have a whole different animal going on. The other one, which is the worst, and I think probably obviously so, is you tell a father that he can't see his kid. You as a family court judge, you tell a father, sorry, you're not getting custody, and here's a very big limitation on when you can see your kid. That's when you get violence. I have tried to do my best, especially for McKinley's sake, to not go that kind of route. I have tried to do what I can within the system. I've tried to make things better. One of the things that my law office has taken on over the last couple of years is dealing with families, helping families with abducted children. And, I've been happy to say that through what was called originally Project Thaler, which is now going to be the McKinley Project, we've been able to recover children all over the country from abductions. And we just on Friday managed to recover a child who'd been missing with his mother for 2 years. And it just, kind of poof into the wind. And we managed to track down mother, we managed to track down child, and father is flying in to have a reunion with his son probably next week. So we feel really good about that. So we've tried to take, I've tried to take what is a very unfortunate, tragic situation of, using and abusing a child, to cover up criminal wrongdoing, and tried to make something very good out of it by, in my son's name, going out there and being able to help families, with their problems and their crises as well. And so, we feel very good about that. I feel very good about that. I think we're doing things that are very important. We're exposing things that are very important. And I think to myself, and I think Christine would agree with me on this, I think to myself, what kind of world do I want my children growing up in? I've got my oldest one who's 23, my youngest one who's 6. What world do I want them growing up in? What kind of system do I want them to be in? How do I want them to trust their government and trust that, when they go to a court or they vote in an election for that matter, that what they're doing matters and that it is counted and that this is as fair as you can make it, but this is fair.
Right.
That's what's important to me. That's what's important for my kids. That's what's important for these next generations. And when we fail, we see some of the things that happen on college campuses over the last couple of months. When we fail to our kids, we fail with all of these things. This is what we get. And that kind of chaos is going to get worse. It doesn't matter if Trump wins or loses the election. It's not even about politics. It's about sociology. I want my kids to grow up in a world where they can count on things, where they know that things are going to be fair, where they can predict outcome, et cetera, et cetera. So, like I said, I've done a lot of work in that. And to the degree that we promote it, it's not really a promotion. I mean, we do what we can for families as best we can. I get people call me not just from the United States, but from Canada and from other countries where their children have been abducted and how to handle it, what to do, what not to do, especially what not to do. And so we do everything we can to help them.
Okay. Oh, man. That's very admirable and honorable. I have people contact me all the time on that issue. Is it okay if I refer them over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we get busy. So, if we don't get back to you, if I don't get back to you immediately, it's not because we don't like you. It's just, we get a lot of calls, but I at least try to talk to everybody. And if there's a service I can refer them to, if there's some attorney I can refer them to, if there's something we can do, we try to do whatever we can. And part of what we do is, we've made this a charitable organization, really just to have the organization. But, we get donations. We do work off of monies, and we try to at least provide as much services, especially legal services, as we can at the lowest possible price we can do it, to be able to help families that are in need. And one of the things that we have found is that, it's not, look, you have a country of 330 million people, so you're going to have a lot of people in distress. I mean, it's just the sheer numbers of it. But I think, one of the things that we've looked at is what are the common themes. One of the things that the book has a very large chapter on early on in the first section of the book, it's a 4-section book, is it talks about parental alienation and child abduction and how prevalent it is in the United States, especially, how often it happens, and how poor the system is on dealing with it, even for judges who want to do something and consider this a very important subject. It is amazing how difficult it is even for them. One of the problems, for example, that I had with the McKinley situation is I had court orders. Despite people have made comments all over the place because stories have been written that are entirely false. I had a 50-50 custody order. I had 50% custody of my child. The custody orders were violated. That's what happened. That's the reality. We have the orders. We have them in the book. People can actually read the orders. What happened is that when McKinley was abducted, the city of Mesa, which is a corrupt organization in and of itself, not only refused to honor the orders, but essentially said to me flatly, I had representatives of the police department of the city of Mesa say to me flatly, you could go tomorrow, get an order from the judge ordering us to go get your child and hand him to you. We will disregard the order. So you now have a city and a city police department stating categorically, we don't care what the Superior Court orders. We simply won't follow it. And they're adamant about that. And by the way, it's not like they said this to me under their breath. If you call them and ask them, they will tell you this. Now, I don't know who's supposed to enforce that, but I can tell you that nobody is. That ultimately Mesa is going to be held in contempt of court for this, for not only refusing to honor the order that was in place, but refusing to honor any order that directs them to do anything. This is the level of lawlessness that I think Christine doesn't really quite understand that you have going on in Arizona. It's not simply that you have corrupt people and corrupt judges and you have people like Carrie Lake not winning elections when they should and on and on and on. Yeah. It's that in the micro level of things, you've got cities, city courts, city officials who refuse to follow court orders. And that's something you can't have. That's something you can never have. McKinley is not with me to this day because officials in the city of Mesa decided that they were above the law. They didn't have to follow court orders and they weren't going to. That's a problem. And there will be payback for that. The city of Mesa will get hit with that. But that's the kind of problem that you have going on here. That's the level of corruption you're talking about. And all in this case, especially because they didn't want me to have this child, because they wanted to try to extort a stop of the investigation.
Wow. Let me ask you this. This is kind of getting off our topic here, but you've gone on, and I didn't want to cut you off and lose your train of thought. What is your estimation on the value of the mortgage fraud across the country?
That's a good question, and you're not the first to ask. I mean, we looked at, like, for example, in Arizona. We look at a couple of factors. It's not necessarily just the size of population. We look at what the new home construction starts look like, because that helps us a lot. You and I talked earlier about the $25 million being used to buy 105 houses. I think we talked about that earlier. But we have both, long-standing houses being bought, but also new home construction. New home construction is probably the biggest area of fraud. So when we look at that, when we look at cities, get a great example of this. Look at Colorado. If you went to say the Denver area or Colorado Springs or both, or the whole I-25 corridor, Interstate 25 corridor between Colorado Springs and Denver, Colorado, say 10, 15 years ago, it was pretty sparse. Now all you see along the corridor is housing developments. That's all you see as far as the eye can see. I mean, especially in places, especially places like Colorado Springs. I mean, the amount of housing that's been created there in the suburb areas of Denver, the amount of housing that's been created is absolutely huge. So when you're looking at stuff like that, we're finding just from what we can see in the multi-billions of dollars. We find it in the high multi-millions of dollars in Arizona. We find it across the country in the billions of dollars. The best estimate we can give is probably about $100 billion of what we believe is real estate that is specifically targeted for falsified deeds, for money laundering efforts.
I think it's low.
No, I think it's give or take about 100 billion. Part of the problem, like I said, is that it's very hard to tell the totality of it at any given time. So there's a lot of things we look at. Like, one of the things we've been able to look at in Arizona, which has made this easier, as I said, is we've been able to work backwards. So one of the things we could do is, once we find a mortgage company that's essentially fake, that's designed specifically to launder cash, we can then pull their deeds and see how many loans they've given in the state. So then what we can do is we can extrapolate. I mean, this is what you go to statistician school for. But essentially what we do is we look at it, we say, okay, what's the percentage of mortgages that this particular company does? For example, we have a Utah-based company that has done a ton, probably almost a third of new mortgages in Arizona have been written by this company over the last 5 years. So we look at them and we say, okay, how many mortgages have they written? What are the total number of mortgages? Because we can get these numbers we can get. And then we try to figure out by running audits what the percentages are of fake mortgages versus real mortgages. And so from there, we can kind of extrapolate how much money is flowing through the system. We can't know every one, obviously, and certainly with the bigger ones, it's a whole lot easier. Because, like I said, we can see their numbers. But, like I said, at any given time, we think there's about $100 billion running through the system of laundered cash. I mean, think of it this way. If you've got $150 billion a year, oops, where are you here? There you go. I got you. I lost you for a second there. If you've got $150 billion going through your system annually, okay, $150 billion going through the U.S. annually, you have to figure that a large part of that is going to circulate through real estate at some point. It's not the only thing it's going through, but real estate's going to play a big part of that. So when you're talking about how much at any given time, yeah, about $100 billion is probably about right.
Wow, that's crazy. Because I've looked into the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation of what their actual liability is, and it's 17 trillion in U.S. deposits in U.S. banks.
Right.
Yeah. So I was kind of basing off that, that's 17 trillion.
You have to remember that, once the money is laundered, it's invested into other things. Sometimes it circulates back, it goes back into drugs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there are circular things with this, but oftentimes it's then used for other investments. Like, one of the things we found in Arizona is that you have a symbiotic relationship between property investment groups that specifically invest, either developers who develop or investors who invest in large scale property purchases, going in with getting their funding from cartels. So monies get laundered, which makes perfect sense. And then they get invested back into the system in legal ways. So, for example, a lot of the developers in Arizona are funded through what are, in essence, cartel dollars. Cartel dollars that have been cleaned, but cartel dollars. So, when you're talking about that those $17 trillion or so, that are being, insured, that are insured, deposits are insured, a whole lot of them certainly originated. A lot of that originated in illegal transactions. Just figure about 10% did. So, you probably have over $1 trillion that at least started out coming from some form of illegal capital at some point. But in terms of at any given moment, the value of the real estate, you're looking in the hundreds of billions of dollars probably.
How far back have you traced this to, let's just go with the drug traffickers, the cartels in Mexico? Have you traced this back to
we've not only traced it back to the drug traffickers, we've traced it back to the Chinese. We've traced it back to the Mormon Church. I mean, one of the big headaches of this is
Mormon Church.
And I'll explain. So make sure anybody who hasn't read the book, who hasn't seen me before, understands what we're talking about here. Mesa, the two major cities in Arizona that are involved in the fraud are Mesa and Gilbert. If anybody who's been there knows that both cities are completely, totally run by the Mormon Church. These ought to be Mormon cities. For example, the kids who are in public school there actually leave during a portion of the day and go over to the church and get church teachings and then go back to school. That's how Mesa and Gilbert actually operate. The leadership is entirely Mormon, from the city council to the mayor to the city controller to the city prosecutor, all Mormon all the time. I used to have this joke when I lived in Gilbert, when Brittany and I lived in Gilbert. I had this joke where people would say, "Oh, you bought a new house?" "Yeah, we bought a house." They'd say, "Are you living in a gate-guarded community?" And I'd say, "No, I live in Gilbert." Because there's no crime in Gilbert. It is Mormon. Even during the time I was there, the expansion of the city and the number of Mormon, there are Mormon temples, which are the ones that only Mormons can go into, but there's Mormon churches, which people, which the average person can be invited into and can go to. And we had about a 5 times increase in the churches, in the Mormon churches, just within a 5-mile radius of our house during the 5 years we lived there. This is, let me put it this way: there's a street on the south end of Gilbert. There's a street, a very well-known street, where when you drive by it, all you see is polygamous houses. And wow. the polygamous houses, for those who don't know, for people who don't know anything about this, polygamous houses are set up where there's basically almost like 2 houses. There's the main house, the main basic house, and then usually over the garage is a whole secondary house. And the wives live in this secondary house, except for whoever's turn it is to be in the main house. That's how this works. So there's an entire row on the street. It's Ocotillo Road if you're scoring at home, where you drive down it and all you have are Mormon polygamous houses. And you have big signs that say "do not enter" and no trespassing and on and on. But it's very obvious if you know the area, you know that these are what these houses are. So the deep Mormon practices go on. The problem is that the Mormon Church, especially in Arizona, has deals with the cartels, partly to keep them safe, partly because the Mormon Church has a very large presence in Mexico. It has a very large agrarian presence in Mexico. It does a lot of farming in Mexico. And as a result, when drugs became a big deal, especially with cocaine, not as much with marijuana, but when cocaine became a thing in the mid to late 80s, deals had to be made to keep Mormons safe. So the deals basically is that you don't attack us in our farms in Mexico, and we in turn will use our money laundering system to launder drug monies. That was the deal. And so for the last 20, 25 years, really even longer, but last 20, 25 years, that's what's gone on. So really since the late 80s, early 90s, what you've now have in Arizona is a Mormon church based in Arizona, the Arizona basis. So this doesn't mean people in Utah, but the Arizona-based Mormon church essentially launders the cash through their laundering systems that they created the cartels didn't create the property system. The Mormons did. And so a lot of this cash goes to systems that they created. And then it comes back out into new development. So it gets put from, being laundered into investment. And so the investment portfolios of both the Mormons and of the cartels are now rather extensive. And what makes it even worse is that the drugs and a lot of the product that then gets laundered is being put through by the Chinese government. So the Chinese government now supplies the fentanyl ingredients. It supplies the crystal meth ingredients. It supplies the equipment. It supplies the know-how. It supplies the formulas. It supplies even the equipment used to dig the tunnels that go underground to carry the drugs into the United States, and so on and so forth. So you have the Chinese government now participating with the drug cartels, which then participate with the Mormon Church. It's a trifecta. And so when we talk about the Mormon, we talk about the Chinese buying land. One of the things that people don't realize, because we've heard about the land buying, like in North Dakota and other places where we have military installations. Take that out of your head for a moment. Most of the Chinese purchases of land, not of businesses or anything, but of land, is in Arizona and Utah. And there's a reason for it. And so one of the things we talk about in the book is this particular connection, why it is so dangerous, why it's become so dangerous. And we specifically talk about very specific cases of where the Chinese government has had influence on Mormon communities in Utah, where everything from new laws being written to bills that are about to be passed, et cetera, have Chinese influence all over them. And it's not a secret. Like I said, it is to the point that, very few people wake up in the morning saying, I'm going to learn more about Utah. If you're Mormon, you do. But if you're not, this is not a state that people pay a lot of attention to. But it's something that's extremely, extremely important, because this is one of the issues that goes on there, is that the Chinese have now essentially invaded both parts of Arizona and parts of China, and they are parts of Utah, and they've gotten involved directly in the government to make sure they preserve their positions.
Just like they've done with Hollywood.
Yeah, just like they've done with Hollywood.
Yep.
I'm going to lose you in a minute because I'm running out of power here.
Okay.
But I'll sign off with that, and I'm happy to come back anytime and discuss with you and discuss with your audience. And like I said, I'm happy to take questions, so they can write them directly to me. On Twitter, I think I'm well known on there, but on Twitter, I'm Thaler ESQ, Thaler ESQ. They can write me at reporttothegovernor.com. They can go to the website. They can see, not only can they get the book, if they order the book, by the way, through the website, they can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, where all books are sold. But if they order it through the website, I will sign the book for them. I will personalize, it for them and get it off to them so they can do that. We are very competitively priced, so it doesn't cost you any more to do that. And we get books out usually within 2 or 3 days. We're pretty good about getting them out. So we're happy to do that. We have other things on the site, including other interviews I've done. We have a section called investigations, where we have videos and stuff that show you very specifics of what we're saying, where you can see the actual evidence. There's a narrative that goes with it. You can actually see exactly what we're talking about, see the documents. All of this is also available in the book. And then, of course, all of the footnotes. The book is 630 pages. It's big. It has 507 footnotes. The footnote material, rather than be in the book and make it a 10,000-page book, is actually in the site Report to the Governor. You go to the footnote section and click on it, and everything from 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 507 is on there. And that's about another 5,000 pages of evidentiary documents to support everything that we've talked about here.
Which is that's a PhD college thesis, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's funny. I'm going to be actually working, before I run out of power here, I'm going to be working on my PhD starting in 2025. And one of the things I was talking to the program about today was about my next book, which will be my PhD thesis, but also about this book and how it essentially is exactly that. It's kind of a thesis to begin with. So we already have more stuff in mind going forward that will probably be part of the PhD thesis. So, that's what we're doing here.
Okay. You've told everybody how to reach you, reporttothegovernor.com. We're going to close it off. I will contact you tomorrow. Midday, good for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Contact me and we can absolutely schedule. And like I said, I really do appreciate comments one way or the other. Call me whatever name you want. It's not new. I've been a lawyer for a lot of years too. It's not really new. But I'm happy if somebody disagrees with me, tell me why you disagree. I'm happy to address it. and even talk to people on the air. I don't know if you can arrange that or not, but I don't have a problem with answering questions. When we say the things that we say in this kind of a book, the least I can do is debate the issue, like I did with Christine, like I do with anyone else. And believe me, I'm not always as forthright as I was with Christine, but some issues kind of require that. But I'm happy to discuss it. I'm happy to hear other people's ideas, suggestions, everything. I think it's important. Dialogue is the most important thing you can have here.
Right. Correct. Yeah. In Christine's case, she's doing this on her own. She's going to the local law library, county.
Yeah, and it's hard as hell. And everybody should be not only, it's not sympathetic, but everybody should be very proud of her for doing this. That is the hardest thing in the world, is to not be a lawyer, not know the system, have to get involved in it when you never wanted to and never planned on it, and be in the middle of this kind of a crisis. It's very difficult. It's difficult for me. I'm a lawyer. It's difficult for my team, and they've been doing this with me for 35 years.
That's why I have you on the show, because I completely understand what it takes to do a RICO investigation, much less write a book.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah,
500
it's
foot.
Tough. It's tough. Floyd, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it, John. We'll have him back on, folks.
Thanks.
So John Thaler, reporttothegovernor.com. Thank you again for your service to everybody, sir, and our country.
Thank you, Floyd. Take care.
You're more than welcome.
Bye.
All right, folks, there you go. And I put him in the waiting room so he can sign off and do what he needs to do. And Christine Scott, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. John Thaler, again, I thank you. Thank you both for your service, for your sacrifice, because I know it's costing you time, energy, and money. 3 things we can't get back. And as we did, we McKinley, so you guys know what's going on with that. I have my own theory. I'm sure he has his own theory about what that really looks like. And I was going to ask him, but it's probably better left unsaid for the moment. But I will have John back on. I don't know when. Hopefully we might make this a weekly thing for you guys and come on and we'll just address each topic show by show. Wow. That was an awesome show. I think that's one of the best I've done. So I really appreciate my guests. I appreciate everybody who's watched the video. Like, subscribe, share, hit that notification bell, leave a comment below. Again, this video will not be on YouTube. I'm taking it down as soon as I hit the leave meeting button. So for those of you who want to see this video again, it will be on Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, Telegram, Facebook, etc., etc. So go look for it over there. I will more likely do a live rebroadcast, one time only, probably this weekend or next week. You're more than welcome. Thank you for being here. John, everybody should be asking John to be on his show. They should be talking about his book. One question I didn't get to ask him, I will. Why is the largest money laundering scheme in U.S. history not in the mainstream media, and how come everybody doesn't know about it? Excellent question. So we'll get there next time. Thanks for watching. I appreciate everybody. Leave a comment below. I'll put a description in here. I'll put more information as I recreate this video. Thank you for being here, everybody. Hey, y'all have a safe week. Again, like I said, we had a storm come through here. My electricity went off. That's why I was out for a couple portions of the video in mid-video. So again, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I'll see y'all next time.